Chapter 1240. Following Ouyang Shua's order, Great Xia's war machine quickly began to operate. On the 5th day of the 5th month, Sun Bin led the brave Tiger Army north from the border of the East Sea province, brazenly killing his way into the Great Zhou dynasty's Ludong province, opening the prelude to the Great Xia's conquest of the Great Zhou dynasty. The next day, Yu Fei led the Northern Frontier Army westward from the border of the Northern Frontier province, heading straight for the hinterland of the capital province of the Zhou dynasty. At the same time, Zhuozongtong led the Hedong army to advance from Hedong province, cooperating with the Northern Frontier Army to launch a pincer attack from the east and west. The Great Xia dynasty only dispatched these three army groups. The remaining forces, including the Imperial Guard garrisoned in the capital, the Leopard Army and the Xiangjiang Army in the southeast war zone, and the Soaring Eagle Army garrisoned in the Western Sea province, were all biding their time. Only the Soaring Phoenix Army stationed in Vast Gold province arranged for a legion to head south and station in Northern Frontier province. The purpose of doing this was very obvious. It was to intimidate the Qin, Tang, and Song kingdoms. Among the three kingdoms, no matter which kingdom sent reinforcements to Great Zhou, they would face the invasion of Great Xia. The Soaring Eagle Army monitored Great Qin, the Leopard Army monitored Great Tang, and the Xiangjiang Army and Yulin Royal Forest Army monitored Great Song. It wasn't hard to see that out of the three armies that Great Xia had arranged to attack Great Zhou, two of them belonged to the border defense system. However, the ones that were arranged to monitor the three states were top-notch elite troops. His intention couldn't be any clearer. In this way, the so-called alliance of the four countries had in fact been dismembered. If they rescue Great Zhou, they will not be able to protect their homeland. If they do not rescue Great Zhou, they will not be able to protect Great Zhou. Once Great Zhou was destroyed, Great Xia would continue to carry out the strategy of breaking them down one by one. Therefore, this was a dead knot. No matter how it changed, the four-nation alliance seemed to be unable to escape the fate of destruction. The root cause of the current situation was the powerful military strength of the Xia kingdom. Of course, if the Flying Bear army, led by Li Jing, had already attacked Tubo, the plan would be more stable. Speaking of which, Ouyang Shua still had to thank the Mongolian Empire. If it wasn't for the fact that the Mongolian Empire was completely engulfed in the Persian War, the Northern Frontier Army and Hedong Army wouldn't have dared to put in all their effort to destroy Zhou. Genghis Khan was using Ouyang Shua, and Ouyang Shua was also using Genghis Khan. May 7th, Ludong Province, Peng City. As the former West Chu capital, Peng City was the largest city in the East Lu province, as well as the administrative center of the province. At the same time, the city was also the headquarters of the Great Zhou's Danyang army. Speaking of the Danyang army, their fates were full of troubles. First, the army lost tens of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield of the Great Jin dynasty. Not only did they not receive effective reinforcements, but they were also forced to transfer tens of thousands of elite soldiers away when Di Chun reorganized the royal army. Only when they arrived at Ludong province did they transfer a large number of new soldiers from the reserves to make up for the lack of soldiers. With such a heavily damaged army, they couldn't even compare to the border guards of Great Xia, let alone the brave Tiger Army, which was as ferocious as wolves. Lord Chunxin, the actual controller of the Danyang army, did not have the slightest confidence in defending the Ludong province. However, Di Chun had given a strict order for the Danyang army to hold their ground. Di Chun was forced to do this. Once the Ludong province fell, the Great Zhou dynasty would have no buffer zone, and they would die for sure. Peng City was close to the border of Ludong province and was only a short distance away from Donghai province. Therefore, on the second day after the brave Tiger Army invaded the Ludong province, the two sides started a bloody battle along the long border of the province, with Peng City as the fulcrum. In the past winter, the Great Zhou dynasty, despite being short of soldiers and people, still used the army and a large number of laborers to strengthen the fortifications at the border. After losing the barrier of Donghai province, the Ludong province became even more important. It was reported that in just one winter, The number of laborers who died at the construction sites at the border of Donghai province was no less than 2,000. Under the pressure of Di Chun, the people of the Great Zhou dynasty were close to their limits. This time, in the face of the Great Xia's attack, in order to protect the logistics, they used a large number of laborers, causing the heavens to be angry and the people to be resentful. Even if the Great Xia did not attack, the Great Zhou dynasty was actually on the verge of collapse. It was not that a little bit of food had forced the Great Zhou dynasty into a dead end. Food was just a fuse. What really caused the Great Zhou dynasty to fall into such a predicament was the system that it had always relied on to survive in the wilderness. As everyone knew, the Great Zhou dynasty was founded by the aristocratic families. After the Great Zhou dynasty was established, apart from the four great families, there were more than 30 small and medium-sized families that depended on them. Together, they formed the foundation of the Great Zhou dynasty. From the important departments of the Great Zhou dynasty to the profitable commercial fields, they were all controlled by the aristocratic families. The aristocratic families were the foundation of the Great Zhou dynasty. Without the support of these aristocratic families, no matter if it was the earliest 6 hegemons of Han, or the mid-stage Yanhuan Alliance, or the current Great Zhou dynasty, they would not be able to stand out. For territories like Han City to be able to survive in the wilderness, it was because of the large number of talents and funds provided by the aristocratic families that they could support so that they would not fall behind Shanghai City at that time. But don't forget, the nature of the aristocratic families was greed. Naturally, there would be rewards for their efforts. After the establishment of the Great Zhou dynasty, in the eyes of the aristocratic families, they had already established an invincible foundation in the wilderness. It was time to reap the fruits of victory. Dividing the power of the Great Zhou dynasty and competing with the people in the commercial fields were all very normal things. There were even those who relied on their family's meritorious status to commit crimes in the imperial court, disregarding human life, which happened from time to time. If not for the suppression of Di Chun and the others, even crazier things could have happened. Di Chun envied the Great Xia dynasty for being able to implement the rule of law, but he could not imitate it because it could not be carried out. The past winter was a heavy disaster for the people of the Great Zhou dynasty, but it was a feast for the aristocratic families. They hoarded goods, bought low and sold high, and plundered the wealth of the people. Originally, the aristocratic families were also rational and would not kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. The problem was with the achievement points constantly being updated and the Great Zhou dynasty in danger of being destroyed at any time. These aristocratic families could no longer hold back and wanted to use the last bit of time to plunder resources and exchange them for achievement points. Everything else was fake. Only the achievement points were the most real. For this, they did not hesitate to eat up the entire Great Zhou dynasty and even incited a rebellion among the people, sending troops to suppress them. In the eyes of the aristocratic families, NPCs were a pile of data, a tool for them to plunder achievement points. Who, I ask, has pity for a worker? Just as the Great Xia dynasty sent troops to attack the Great Zhou dynasty, the situation had already developed to a point where it could no longer be remedied. Within the two provinces, there was a tense atmosphere that made people feel uneasy. Although Di Chun knew that the aristocratic families were detestable, he was powerless to stop them. Therefore, it was not only the small and medium-sized aristocratic families that went crazy. Many members of the Di family themselves participated in this feast, and they were eating the fattest piece of meat. As such, what position did Di Chun have to restrain the other aristocratic families? This was also one of the reasons why Di Chun was depressed throughout the winter, because the Great Zhou dynasty was no longer under his control. This was such a tragedy. Chapter 1241. As the front line was filled with smoke and the flames of war raged, the rear of the Great Zhou dynasty could no longer be suppressed. In the past winter, the people of the Great Zhou dynasty, who had been living in misery, slowly accumulated their anger and resentment towards the aristocratic families in their hearts. Like a trickling stream, they gathered into a volcano, ready to erupt at any time and destroy everything. The war had finally allowed this volcano to find a point to erupt. On the 10th day of the 5th month, the valiant General Qin Xiong led the 4th Corps of the brave Tiger Army. After a series of battles, they were the first to break through the defensive line of the Danyang Army from the west and entered the hinterland of the Ludong province. Once the gap was opened, it could no longer be plugged. In the next few days, Red Eagle led the 2nd Corps, and the 3rd Corps, led by Zhao Shi, broke through the defensive line of Ludong province from the east and followed them into the hinterlands. The success of the left and right wings made Sun Bin feel much more at ease. He calmly commanded the 1st Corps and the 5th Corps to guard the middle road and stall the main force of the Scarlet Yang Army. According to Sun Bin's plan, he would arrange for the left and right flanks to outflank Pengcheng, and then cooperate with the Central Army to encircle the Red Sun Army, gradually nibbling away at the enemy and forcing them into a desperate situation. Although the Danyang Army had the geographical advantage, and their commander, Tian Dan, was also a famous general, they were not strong enough. More importantly, the army was short of rations and fodder and could not last long. It was precisely because Sun Bin saw through the enemy's weakness that he adopted the siege tactic. After a long stalemate, the Danyang army could only surrender when Peng City ran out of provisions. But what happened next completely changed the direction of the war. After the two armies broke through the defensive line, they did two things. First, they would continue to expand the battle results. They would cooperate with each other from the inside and outside, continuously widening the gap that they had opened. Then, they would completely destroy the entire section of the enemy's defensive fortifications to relieve their worries. The second was to send out a vanguard force to occupy the cities around Peng City and establish a stronghold. On the 13th day of the 5th month, the 1st Division of the 4th Corps of the Brave Tiger Army, as the vanguard of the left wing, was ordered to arrive at Xiapi City, preparing to capture the city and use it as the forward base of the left wing. Xiapi City was located in the northwest corner of Peng City. It was the only way to reach Peng City. Although it was just a county, the city was very strong. Moreover, there were 6,000 soldiers of the Danyang army stationed in the city. It was not easy to attack. The result was out of everyone's expectations. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the 1st Division launched an attack on Xiapi City. The earth-shattering battle spread from the top of the city wall all the way into the city, evoking the already restless emotions of the citizens in the city. When it was close to noon, when the two armies were fighting fiercely, a group of mobs suddenly rushed into the county office, injured the runners, detained the county magistrate, and raised the flag of resistance against the Great Zhou dynasty. Affected by this, the entire Xiapi city was in a mess. The sudden riots spread rapidly from the county government. Seeing that the county government had fallen, more and more people joined in the riot. They opened the granaries and looted the shops. As the riots spread to the area near the city wall, the Danyang city guards panicked. They didn't know if they should suppress the riot or defend the city wall first. Upon seeing this, the Great Xia army launched an even more ferocious attack. Without logistical support, the Danyang army suffered heavy losses. Both sides fought fiercely until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The surviving Danyang army had no choice but to surrender. The city of Xiapi was conquered by the Xia dynasty in one day. The biggest contributor was the mob at the beginning. The Great Zhou dynasty finally paid the price for their cruel rule. And this was just the beginning. The riot in Xiapi was like a small flame that completely ignited the anger of the people of the Great Zhou dynasty. Encouraged by this, more than 10 riots broke out in the Ludong province within a day. As a result of this, wherever the Great Xia army went, the city surrendered at the mere sight of them. After receiving the news, Sun Bin made a prompt decision. He ordered the armies on the left and right wings not to besiege Pengcheng, but to immediately lead the army north and take advantage of the hard-earned popular support to conquer the whole territory of Ludong. It had to be said that Sun Bin's decision was very wise. In the following week, The armies on the left and right wings of the brave Tiger Army were like two giant dragons that plunged into the hinterland of Ludong province. Responding to the riots everywhere, they conquered one city after another. The riots provided assistance to the Great Xia army in besieging the cities. The arrival of the Great Xia army further encouraged the riots and intimidated the county yamen as well as the local garrisons. Both sides promoted each other like a rolling snowball. They rapidly conquered more than half of Ludong's territory at the speed of several cities per day. In the end, seeing that the war situation was good, the armies on the left and right wings again divided their troops into divisions and rapidly advanced to the north. The speed of the siege was greatly increased. On the 20th of May, apart from the surroundings of Pengcheng, the whole of Ludong province belonged to the Great Xia. The upheaval was too sudden. Lord Chunxin was so scared that his face turned pale. He gritted his teeth and simply ordered the main force of the Danyang army to withdraw into Pengcheng. Following that, Lord Chunxin took the initiative to contact Ouyang Shuo and requested to submit to the Great Xia. Looking at Lord Chunxin in the video, Ouyang Shuo had a complicated expression. Lord Chunxin, who was once proud and arrogant and regarded him as his archenemy, was now only respectful. The nature of a businessman allowed Lord Chunxin to quickly let go of the pride in his heart. This call not only concerned Lord Chunxin's fate, but also the fate of the entire clan. If Ouyang Shuo insisted on not accepting Lord Chunxin's submission, it would undoubtedly be a disaster for their clan. Their 6 years of hard work would all turn into bubbles. "Give me a reason to accept your submission," Ouyang Shuo said indifferently. Lord Chunxin's heart trembled. He forced a smile and said, "The main force of the Danyang army still exists. If we defend Pengcheng to the death, the Great Xia will also have to pay a huge price. Both sides will suffer. This is not what you wish to see, right?" Ouyang Shuo smiled. "This may not be so. I wonder how many days of rations Pengcheng has. 10 days? 5 days?" This, Lord Chunxin paused again. He knew that he could not show weakness at this time, otherwise his only bargaining chip would be gone. He swallowed his saliva and calmly said, "As long as we defend to the death, there will always be a way. This reason is not enough." Ouyang Shuo shook his head. Lord Chunxin was helpless. He knew that he did not have the capital to bargain with Ouyang Shuo now. If Ouyang Shuo said it was not enough, then it was not enough. After thinking for a while, he said, "As long as Pengcheng is not destroyed, we cannot rule out the possibility of Qin, Tang, and Song supporting Handan. Accept my submission, and there will be no more variables in the Battle of Great Zhou." Hearing this, Ouyang Shuo nodded. The brave Tiger Army was like a hot knife through butter on the battlefield in Ludong. The Hedong Army had bypassed the Northern Frontier Army's advance in Jingdu Province, but they were very cautious and were still contending with the Great Zhou Imperial Army around the border. There were two reasons. Firstly, the capital province was the foundation of the Zhou dynasty after all. Its welfare was relatively good, and the people were stable. Even though a large-scale riot had broken out in Ludong province, the capital province was still very calm. Secondly, he was worried that the allied forces of the three states would send reinforcements to Handan. In order not to fall into the enemy's trap, the two armies could only fight steadily and not advance too quickly. Just as Lord Chunxin said, once the Danyang army surrendered, Ludong province would belong to the Great Xia. When the brave Tiger Army moved north, Qin, Tang, and Song would not get involved in this mess. Chapter 1242. Then what do you want? Ouyang Shuo asked. Hearing this, Lord Chunxin was taken aback. Honestly speaking, before the call, Lord Chunxin had anticipated this. But after this conversation just now, he instantly lost his confidence. Can I get the same treatment as Xiongba? Lord Chunxin probed. Xiongba was not only the governor of the Great Xia. His entire clan, as long as they were truly talented and not a spoiled brat, could obtain an official position in the Great Xia. This was already very good. Furthermore, there was news that Ouyang Shuo would put Xiongba in an important position in the future. No, Ouyang Shuo decisively refused. Lord Chunshin really had the nerve to open his mouth. At that time, Xiongba's submission would directly shake the foundation of the Great Zhou, directly or indirectly weakening the Great Zhou dynasty's power by more than half. It could be said that Xiongba's clan deserved such treatment, not to mention Xiongba's own ability. How could Lord Chunshin's submission be compared to Xiongba's? Then what about the same treatment as Wolf Warrior? Lord Chunshin asked for the next best thing. Ouyang Shua saw this and really admired Lord Chunshin's bargaining ability. He did not intend to dilly-dally and straightforwardly said, "Let's put it this way. After submitting to the Great Xia, you and your clan should focus on business. Don't get involved in the muddy waters of politics. It is not suitable for you." Hearing this, Lord Chunshin's face paled. After a long while, he said, "No room for discussion?" Ouyang Shua shook his head. "Either accept or meet on the battlefield." Seeing that Lord Chunshin was still unresigned, Ouyang Shua added, 6 years as a lord is enough to prove that you and your clan are not suited to managing a territory. Returning to the business domain that you are most proficient in, although there will be a period of loss, in the long run, it may not necessarily be a bad thing." Lord Chunshin was silent. Looking back at his career as a lord, his most glorious moment was when he fought against Di Chun, successfully split the Handan Six Hegemons, and formed the Spring and Autumn Alliance. Now that he thought about it, it was really a long time ago. At that time, Xiongba had relied on Lord Chunshin's support to obtain a ticket to the game. Now, things remained the same, but the people had changed. In 6 years, I have not truly won even once. Lord Chunshin's face was full of bitterness. Pausing for a moment, Lord Chunshin's face revealed a resolute expression. "I agree to your conditions." As he said these words, Lord Chunshin actually felt incomparably relaxed, as if a huge rock had been removed. Ouyang Shua looked at him with an astonished expression and smilingly said, "That's right. In return, all of your family's properties in the Great Zhou dynasty will be protected. I won't touch a single thing." "Thank you." Lord Chunshin expressed his sincere thanks. To be able to preserve this family business, he could finally account to his clan. The only thing that Lord Chunshin deeply regretted was that he had previously promised Di Chun that he would hand over his family's base to the Great Song. If he had known this would happen, he would have chosen to submit to the Great Xia. His gains would have been far greater than what he had now. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Finally, Lord Chunshin said, "Can I ask, how are you going to deal with Huitong Money House?" Although Huitong Bank had lost the competition with Four Seas Bank 2 years ago, it had to be said that it was precisely because of the competition between them that Huitong Bank became the second largest bank in China. This was a big deal. Ouyang Shua replied, "It's very simple. Huitong Bank will invest and buy back all the shareholders' shares. Then it will be written off and renamed Huitong Bank. It will also be the fourth bank in the Great Xia. In return, your family can own 10% of Huitong Bank's shares." Lord Chunshin nodded heavily. He was already very satisfied with this result. As the victor, the Great Xia could eat up Huitong Bank until not even dregs were left. Clearly, Ouyang Shua understood a win-win situation. Then it's settled. Lord Chunshin looked at Ouyang Shua with a complicated expression. He took a deep breath as if to bid farewell. He solemnly bowed. "Your Majesty." In the video call, Ouyang Shua nodded. At this moment, Ouyang Shua seemed to be witnessing the passing of an era. Although this era still had some lingering glory, it would eventually fade and no one would be able to reverse it. Unexpected, but also not unexpected. On the 21st of May, under Lord Chunshin's orders, the Danyang army surrendered and gave up Peng City. During this period, Di Chun was not satisfied and wanted to use the chess pieces planted in the Danyang army to start a mutiny. In the end, it did not cause any big waves and was quickly suppressed in a bloody manner. On that day, the entire Ludong province fell into the hands of the Great Xia. The destruction of the Great Zhou was a foregone conclusion. The next day, Sun Bin left the Fifth Army behind to watch over the Danyang army. He then commanded the 4 armies and led them north, preparing to advance into the capital province and form a 3-pronged attack. Capital province, Handan City. After learning of Lord Chuanshin's treason, Di Chun did not even have the strength to be angry. He did not even kill the members of Lord Chuanshin's family in the capital province. It was for no other reason than to leave a way out for the family. Now that the situation had developed to this stage, it was necessary to leave a way out. In the future, the Di family might have to rely on these traders to continue surviving in the game world. After learning of the situation in China, Jack had contacted Di Chun and said that the Forest Empire was willing to accept the Di family. But Di Chun would not go. Even if he was willing, his grandfather would not be able to take it. Jack looked like he was being kind, but who knew what he was up to? If he really went, given the animosity between the two families, he would be at the mercy of others. Di Chun had played this kind of trick many times. Right now, the only ones who could save the Great Zhou were Qin, Tang, and Song. Unfortunately, when the war started, the Great Song had already made it clear that they would not send reinforcements to Handan City. This was because the Great Song had to face the deterrence of the Yulin Royal Guards and the Xiangjiang army. They could not even protect themselves, so how would they have the strength to support the Great Zhou? Qin and Tang, on the other hand, were willing to send 100,000 troops each. Both countries were confident that they could use 400,000 troops to defend against the threat of a great Xia army. Emperor Qin and Emperor Taizong also knew that saving the Great Zhou was equivalent to saving themselves. But the situation of the war was developing too quickly. First, there was an unexpected large-scale riot in the Ludong province. This allowed the Great Xia army to travel unimpeded in the Ludong province. They did not have to worry about the supply route being cut off. Then, there was the compromise of Lord Chunshin and the surrender of the Danyang army. In just half a month, the Great Zhou dynasty had lost an arm and was on the verge of death. Faced with the attack of the three armies of the Great Xia, even if Qin and Tang sent 200,000 troops, it would be of no use. Giving up the Great Zhou was an inevitable choice. Peerless Elegance walked into the royal study. She had just represented the Great Zhou dynasty to negotiate with the envoys of the three countries, asking them to send reinforcements to Handan City. Di Chun looked up and asked, how was it? He himself had already given up hope. Indeed, Peerless Elegance shook her head in silence. Di Chun was dejected. They had really reached a hopeless situation and could not see any hope. Instead, Di Chun calmed down and walked to the window. Looking out the clouds, he muttered, since this is the case, then send someone to negotiate with the Great Xia. Let's see what the outcome is. Okay. Peerless Elegance nodded and turned to leave. Di Chun's voice came from behind. Do you think the old fox will negotiate with us? Peerless Elegance paused for a moment. Without turning around, she said, he will. Her tone was very firm. Following which, she walked out of the royal study and disappeared from Di Chun's sight. In the silent royal study, a long sigh could be heard. Chapter 1243. May 22nd, Jingshi. The Great Zhou wants peace talks. Ouyang Shuo asked. Yes. The one who replied was Zhang Yi. Unlike Xiongba and Lord Chunshin, Di Chun did not contact Ouyang Shuo through a communication compass. Instead, he used formal diplomatic channels to negotiate. Then let's talk. Ouyang Shuo said lightly. Zhang Yi asked carefully, may I ask what instructions your majesty has? Have the Great Zhou surrender unconditionally. This. Zhang Yi looked troubled. This was not a peace talk. This was a forced surrender. How could they talk? That's it. Ouyang Shuo said without hesitation. Yes, your majesty. Zhang Yi left helplessly, thinking about how to complete this task. The next day, Handan City. In the royal study, Di Chun's face was red. He asked uncertainly, did he really say that? Yes. Peerless Elegance was also surprised. Logically, if Ouyang Shuo could accept Lord Chunshin's surrender, he should be able to accept Di Chun's as well. She did not know why he was so resolute. Di Chun gnashed his teeth and said, the old fox is determined to kill me. Then what do you plan to do? Di Chun was silent. He was angry, but he could only be angry. There was no other way. If you push me too far, I'll just fight to the death. Di Chen's eyes were filled with madness. Peerless Elegance shook her head. Don't be impulsive. If we really fight, the fish will die, but the net will not break. Di Chan felt extremely embarrassed. How could he not understand this logic? But apart from this, was there any other way out? Fighting to the death was just to defend the last glory of the clan. Thinking of how he had fought for 6 years and ended up like this, Di Chan felt like a knife was being twisted in his heart. Then tell me, what should we do? Di Chen was disappointed. Peerless Elegance was silent for a while. She said uncertainly, "Do you think he is testing us?" Testing? Is there a need? He's doing this on purpose to humiliate me. I don't think so. Perhaps it was because Peerless Fenghua was not involved in the situation, but she could see more clearly than Di Chen. After Di Chen's interruption, she was even more certain of her previous judgment. She said, with his current status, he shouldn't be so bored as to joke around with the lives of millions of soldiers just to vent his anger. Given the valiant strength of the Great Zhou Imperial Guards, the Great Xia army wouldn't be able to retreat unscathed if both sides were to fight. Really? Di Chen's face was full of self-mockery. In this way, he didn't even have the qualifications to make Ouyang Shua angry. Peerless Elegance opened her mouth to speak, but swallowed her words. At this time, Di Chen didn't need any consolation or sympathy. I'm guessing that he wanted us to surrender unconditionally to test us. Di Chen's eyes became serious. He pulled himself together and thought about what Peerless Elegance had said. After a while, he said, "You mean that the old fox doesn't trust us and wants to use this method to destroy our last hope?" Peerless Elegance nodded in satisfaction. A sober Di Chen was still very powerful. That's the only thing that makes sense. Honestly speaking, given our 6 years of confrontation, it's understandable that he doesn't trust us, Peerless Elegance analyzed. Oh, Di Chen laughed at himself. So, the old fox still thinks of me as an opponent. That's true. Think about it. If the Huaxiao region didn't have Di Chen, and if there wasn't the Yin-Huang alliance, the Great Xia might be able to get to where it was today, but it wouldn't be able to get to where it was so fast and so solid. Both sides were originally whetstones for each other. It was just a pity that there could only be one winner in this confrontation, and Di Chen happened to be the losing side. That was all. Di Chen once again came to the window and stood for a while before he made up his mind. Since that's the case, then let's fulfill his wish. I agree to the Great Xia's conditions. Peerless Elegance nodded, and for the first time, a trace of sorrow flashed in her eyes. Also, tell them that I will personally present the Great Zhou Imperial Seal and the Imperial Seal to Emperor Xia. This, Peerless Elegance was really surprised and said bitterly, "You don't have to do this." Anyone could see how painful it was for Di Chen to make such a decision. There was nothing more humiliating than bowing to the opponent he had fought against for 6 years. Di Chen waved his hand. "You don't have to persuade me anymore. I made up my mind. Since this is what he wants, then I'll give him face and treat it as the last thing I do for the family." He was a member of the family in life and a ghost of the family in death. Even if he had reached the end of the road, as the representative of the family, Di Chen had to shoulder the responsibility. This was the destiny of a member of an aristocratic family, and it couldn't be avoided. I'll go talk to them. Peerless Elegance held back the tears in her eyes, turned around, and left. On the 25th of May, the Great Zhou Empire unconditionally surrendered to the Great Xia Empire. The Imperial Guards, who were still fighting, surrendered to the Great Xia army and voluntarily accepted the reorganization of the Great Xia Empire. When the news came out, the whole of Huaxia was silent. Whether it was the Great Xia players or the Great Zhou players, they didn't make a sound, nor did they ridicule. They just silently watched the quietly passing of an era. At this moment, Xiongba of Manan, Wolf Warrior of Fengjun, and Lord Chunshan of Ludong all silently stopped what they were doing and gazed at the distant north. Their expressions were complicated, and their figures were bleak. There was also wandering fantasy and military killer. For them, the Great Zhou dynasty had a special memory. It was the place where all their dreams began, and also the place where all their dreams ended. Ironically, They also played a part in the process of ending the Great Zhou dynasty. Just like Xiongba, when he decided to submit to the Great Xia, he had already predicted that the Great Zhou dynasty would end up like this. But when the day really came, he didn't feel the slightest bit carefree, only a lingering melancholy. It wasn't just them. Bai Hua, Feng Qiuhuang, Sieging Lion, Tao Wu, and the others all had complicated feelings. Although they were no longer lords, they were still former members of the Mountain and Sea Alliance. They still had enough respect for the Yin-Huang Alliance. To respect one's opponent was to respect oneself. With the surrender of the Great Zhou dynasty, the confrontation between the two alliances finally came to an end. Looking back, the two alliances had already disappeared. In the land of Huaxia, there was only one territory, and it was called the Great Xia. It was their common home. I thought this day would come, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. Bai Hua sighed. Bai Hua still remembered that in the first year of Gaia, the Mountain and Sea Alliance held their first alliance meeting in Mountain and Sea Town to discuss the first battle, the Battle of Zhuolu. At that time, the Yellow Emperor Alliance was still a huge mountain pressing down on them. That day was also May, 13th of May. What a coincidence! Bai Hua remembered it clearly. At that time, Lingxi Town had taken the initiative to seek an alliance with Mountain and Sea Town because the two territories were in the same region. They wanted to help each other, but who would have thought that there would be such a huge battle later on? It was also from that day onwards that the group followed Ouyang Shuo and began a magnificent journey of hegemony. They repeatedly defeated the Yellow Emperor Alliance on the battle map and constantly expanded in the wilderness. Until today, when the Great Zhou Empire unconditionally surrendered to the Great Xia. History was like a cycle, and no one could predict its ending, but it was there. At that time, they only treated Ouyang Shuo as a nominal alliance leader and a friend. Who would have thought that the Mountain and Sea Town would create such a world-shaking business in Huaxia? 6 years seemed like it was just yesterday, but in reality, everything was the same, but the people were different. The once glorious 6 hegemons of Han could only submit to the Great Xia, either to help Ouyang Shuo or to fade into the crowd. They no longer had the pride of the past, and all they could do was struggle to survive. On the other hand, the original members of the Mountain and Sea Alliance, except for those who fell behind midway, had all grown to become powerful figures. Bai Hua had even reached a position that she had never dared to imagine in the past. 6 years ago, or even 3 years ago, who could have imagined such a situation? It had to be said that Ouyang Shuo was a person who created miracles, and the Great Xia was a land of miracles. In this vast and boundless land, there were always miracles happening. As the sun set in the west, the afterglow completely vanished into the distant horizon. Tomorrow, the sun will still rise, won't it? Bai Hua took one last look at the distant horizon and turned back to her seat. As the southern border protector, the burden on her was not light, and she could not slack off or be emotional. Especially when Chao Can was exiled not long ago, it cast a shadow over Bai Hua's career. Bai Hua did not want to explain anything, nor would she plead for Chao Can. He only had himself to blame. Bai Hua also did not know if the emperor had any thoughts about her because of this matter. The only thing she could do was to fulfill her duties. Chapter 1244. 28th of May, Handan City. After the Great Xia army took over Handan City, Ouyang Shuo arrived. In the square in front of the palace, Di Chun, dressed in a white robe, bowed and presented the letter of credence and the jade seal. Ouyang Shuo nodded calmly. Su Chu accepted it on his behalf and completed a simple surrender ceremony. Although the ceremony was short, those who witnessed this historic moment would never forget it. Inside the palace, Ouyang Shuo met Di Chun alone. This was the first time they met alone, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. As long as the Di family is capable, they can serve in the Great Xia. I can also let bygones be bygones for what they did in the Great Zhou dynasty. Ouyang Shuo reassured Di Chun right from the start. Obviously, he had no intention of making things difficult for the Di family. The restrictions on the aristocratic families were calculated from the time the Great Zhou dynasty joined the Great Xia dynasty. Ouyang Shuo had long understood that in order to be tolerant, one must learn to look forward. Ouyang Shuo was very satisfied with Di Chen's tactfulness. What Ouyang Shuo wanted to destroy was the Yin-Huang alliance as a whole, not an individual. Di Chen heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. This time, he had made the right bet. Before entering the room, Di Chen was still worried that Ouyang Shuo would take this opportunity to trample on the Di family. His sacrifice of dignity had finally paid off. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Di Chen said awkwardly. It was obvious that he was not used to the relationship between them. "What about yourself? What are your plans?" Ouyang Shuo asked. "Me?" Di Chen was surprised. He did not think that Ouyang Shuo would appoint him to an important position. "I want to rest for a while," Di Chen said. Ouyang Shuo smiled. Di Chen was retreating in order to advance. Given Di Chen's strong character, how could he really be idle? He could not stand being outdone by Shonba. "In that case, there is a position that is very suitable for you. I intend to appoint you as the deputy of the office of Chamberlain. As a special envoy of the imperial court, you will be responsible for contacting the dynasties around the world and conveying my goodwill to them. What do you think?" The Office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies was a second-rank organization and was under the direct leadership of Ouyang Shuo. The Office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies had one official, Zhang Yi, who was a second-rank official. The junior minister was Violet, who was also the director of the External Affairs Department and was a third-rank official. Below them were the Chamberlain of Dependencies, a fourth-grade official, and the Registrar, a fourth-grade official. Although the Chamberlain of Dependencies was only a rank 4 official and could not be compared to a provincial governor, he was in the center of the royal court and was also a special envoy of the royal court. In terms of actual authority and influence, he was not inferior to a provincial governor. To Di Chen, it was still very tempting. Ouyang Shuo wanted to use Di Chen's identity as a former core member of the Silver Hand to establish a normal communication channel with the Silver Hand. Only Di Chen was qualified for this task. The establishment of communication channels was a crucial step for Great Xia's global strategy. Ouyang Shuo was very self-aware. He knew that no matter how strong Great Xia was, it was impossible for them to unify the entire world within 3 years. In order to achieve the goal of disintegrating the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge, they could only start from the inside, divide and sow discord, and then cooperate with the external war to eliminate the thorns. Only by working on both sides could it be effective. "Yes, Your Majesty." Di Chen was not pretentious and readily accepted the position. Ouyang Shuo nodded and let Di Chen withdraw first. When Di Chen left, Peerless Elegance walked into the room. The two of them passed each other, as if indicating the end of this monarch and subject friendship. "Sit." The name of Peerless Elegance resounded like thunder in Ouyang Shuo's ears. Among the 3 great women of Huaxia, Peerless Elegance was the best. She was also the most important strategist by Di Chen's side. Although she could not save the fate of Great Zhou, Peerless Elegance's value could not be denied. Ouyang Shuo had no intention of exploring Peerless Elegance's mysterious background, nor would he gossip about the special relationship between her and Di Chen. Ouyang Shuo was only concerned about whether this person could be used by the royal court. Peerless Elegance was undoubtedly stunning, but Ouyang Shuo was calm. Di Chen has just agreed to take up the position of Honlu deputy as a special envoy of the royal court. He will travel around the world and establish a communication channel between the royal court and the dynasties of the Silver Hand. "What is your choice?" Ouyang Shuo asked. Peerless Elegance had 2 choices in front of her. One was to not seek any official position and be willing to continue serving Di Chen as a shadow. The other was to take this opportunity to be independent and hold a post in Great Xia. "At the moment when Great Zhou was destroyed, I was a free person," Peerless Elegance replied. Outsiders might not know, but when she first entered the game, Peerless Elegance and Di Chen had an agreement. She would serve Di Chen in the game world for 10 years, and when she reached Hope Planet, she would regain her freedom. However, things were unpredictable. It was only the 7th year of Gaia, and Great Zhou was annihilated. With Di Chen's current status, if he still brought peerless elegance with him, it would be too much of an eyesore. It would not be beneficial for Di Chen to regain a foothold in Great Xia. Therefore, the two of them agreed yesterday that from now on, they would go their separate ways. Returning your freedom in advance is the last thing I can do for you, Di Chen said. Although she said this, peerless elegance was still very melancholic. Although she had obtained her freedom in advance, it was impossible to say that she did not have any feelings for him after being together for 6.5 years. This was fate. Ouyang Shua did not care about peerless elegance's melancholy. After thinking for a while, he said, "If that's the case, there will be a place for you in the secret text pavilion. The gathering of China's 3 female Zhuge scholars in Great Xia's secret text pavilion will be a good story." "Your Majesty trusts me so much?" Peerless elegance was very surprised. Everyone knew that although the secret text pavilion was not famous and its official rank was not high, it was the central organization closest to Ouyang Shua. Those who could hold a post in the secret text pavilion were all people that Ouyang Shua trusted. Currently, there were 4 scholars in the secret text pavilion, and each of them was in charge of a post. Palm Seal Scholar Qing, he was in charge of the overall situation. Scholar Su Zhe was in charge of drafting memorials. Feng Qingwei, who had been promoted to scholar, was in charge of administrative documents and organizing memorials. Bai Nan Pu, who had also been promoted to scholar, was also in charge of announcing the imperial edict. Every scholar was assigned 2 secretaries, and every secretary was assigned 2 clerks. 4 scholars, 8 secretaries, and 16 secretaries formed the secret text pavilion. They controlled the central secrets of the Great Xia Empire and served Ouyang Shua alone. "I can use Feng Qingwei, so I can use you." Peerless elegance was silent and did not pursue the matter. With her intelligence, she naturally knew that this was just an excuse by Ouyang Shua. Before Feng Qingwei entered the secret text pavilion, she had stayed in Shu for half a year to test her loyalty. Now, Ouyang Shua directly skipped this test. It was not that he was bewitched by peerless elegance's beauty or anything else. It was simply because Great Xia was unprecedentedly strong today, and he had the confidence to use this person. If peerless elegance dared to have disloyal thoughts, it was undoubtedly playing with fire. Chapter 1245. Before you go to the secret text pavilion, I hope that you can assist Shun Buhai in bringing Imperial Wind into the Mountain Sea Guards. Is that all right with you? Ouyang Shua asked. Taking over the Great Zhou dynasty was far more complicated than taking over Sui and Shu. As the only player territory that could compete with the Great Xia, there were not only many families in the Great Zhou dynasty, but there were also players' guilds, including many super guilds. Other than that, there was also the terrifying Imperial Wind. The most beautiful thing that Imperial Wind did was to poison Feng Qiuhuang to death. This was a super intelligence agency that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Mountain Sea Guards. If Ouyang Shua couldn't use it, then he could only get rid of it. The problem was that an intelligence agency was not so easy to get rid of. Only a few people knew about the secret agents and strongholds. They could easily change their identities and hide their tracks. Once they hid, there would be endless trouble. That was why Ouyang Shua wanted to use Di Chun and Peerless Elegance to take over the intelligence agency. This was the true test of Peerless Elegance's loyalty. The Mountain Sea Guard were not completely clueless about Imperial Wind. If Peerless Elegance played tricks on this matter, and the Mountain Sea Guards found out, not only would she have no place in the Great Xia, but the entire Di family would also be affected. Even without Ouyang Shua saying much, Peerless Elegance knew the stakes. "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I'll get it done." As the owner of Imperial Wind, Peerless Elegance hoped that it would have a good ending. Ouyang Shua nodded in satisfaction. He didn't mention to Peerless Elegance that if she did this well, she would be in charge of the intelligence in the secret text pavilion in the future. In Handan City, other than Di Chun and Peerless Elegance, Ouyang Shua didn't see anyone else. During this period, the other small and medium-sized families, the president of Unhindered Sword Chi, the president of 18 Steeds of Swallow and Cloud, the president of Embroidered Uniform Guards, the president of Laojun Temple, the president of Purple Thunder Alliance, and the president of Purple Thunder Alliance, such as the representatives of the other small and medium-sized families, were all rejected. Although Ouyang Shua didn't want to settle scores with these small and medium-sized families, he didn't want to promote them either. He dismissed all of them and hired them according to the recruitment rules of Great Xia. As Great Xia fully opened up to the players, the imperial court was already very familiar with such recruitment. This also meant that from now on, these aristocratic families could forget about obtaining any special privileges in the Xia kingdom. Not only that, if the descendants of the aristocratic families dared to act as recklessly as before, they would be punished by the Great Xia Code. The law was merciless. Ouyang Shua was not Dichun. He had absolute authority in Grand Xia. These small and medium-sized aristocratic families did not have the qualifications to disrupt the order that Ouyang Shua had painstakingly established. Ouyang Shua was neutral when it came to the aristocratic families, but when it came to the super guilds, he wanted to get even with them. He was especially merciless when it came to the traitor of the League of Mountains and Seas, Lao Junguan. Ouyang Shua ordered the guilds to follow the example of the Baleful Blood mercenary group. Within a week, they would disband themselves, and their personnel would be distributed to various posts in Great Xia. Otherwise, he would be expelled from Great Xia. The traitor Taoist priest Azurbul was blacklisted by Ouyang Shua. He was immediately executed and then banished. Being expelled from Great Xia was basically equivalent to being expelled from Huaxia. The outcome could be imagined. Ouyang Shua wanted to punish the chicken to warn the monkey. He did not want to give these guilds the slightest bit of hope. They could either give up their power and integrate into the system of Great Xia or get lost. Of course, Ouyang Shua still had a sense of propriety. He only attacked the higher-ups of the guilds, especially the presidents of these guilds. He treated the other members of the guilds equally, except for those who had obvious bad records. With such a two-pronged approach, these super guilds had no choice but to disband. The cabinet would be in charge of how to take over the capital province and Ludong province. There was no need for Ouyang Shua to personally intervene. Therefore, on the 1st of June, Ouyang Shua returned to the capital. Ouyang Shua had to appoint the governors of the two provinces. The capital province and Ludong province were the top provinces in Huaxia. Not only were they geographically superior, but they were also rich in resources. They also had a deep foundation. Ouyang Shua naturally had to be cautious about the choice of governors. After thinking for 2 days, Ouyang Shua finally made up his mind. On the 3rd of June, the imperial court issued a series of appointments and removals for the two provinces. Wang Shou was relieved of his position as the governor of North Inchan province and transferred to the governor of the capital province. The vacant position of governor of North Sichuan was given to the governor of Jiaozhou of the Lingnan province, Songwon. Wang Shouren, also known as Wang Yangming, was a true genius who excelled in both the pen and the sword. Even rarer was that he possessed both ability and integrity. He was deeply trusted by Ouyang Shua, allowing him to manage North Sichuan province to flourish. In the recent storm at the Supreme Court, Wang Shouren had been a clear-cut supporter of the local governors. This transfer to the capital was undoubtedly a new challenge for Wang Shouren. This was because the capital province was adjacent to the Mongolian Empire and would become the front line of the imperial court's war against the Mongols. More importantly, the capital province was the center of the entire north. It had an outstanding strategic position and extraordinary significance. Ouyang Shua was very reassured by having Wang Shouren oversee the capital. 2 years ago, Song Tianxiong had attempted to interfere in the storm over Ouyang Shua's children, which had displeased Ouyang Shua and even implicated Songwen. Not only had Ouyang Shua reprimanded him, he had even ordered that Songwen not be promoted. Only today was Ouyang Shua able to promote Songwen. After experiencing such setbacks, Ouyang Shua believed that Songwen had grown up and clearly understood who he should be loyal to between his family and the imperial court. This time, he promoted Song Wen as an explanation to his wife, Song Jia, so that she wouldn't be put in a difficult position. The imperial court issued an imperial edict to relieve Sun Yanong of his post as the prefectural governor of South Sichuan province and promote him to the governor-general of Ludo. After Gu Xiuwen and Chui Shaoxi, Sun Yanong became the third indigenous governor. At this point, the civil officials of the indigenous people were like rising stars in the officialdom of Great Xia, becoming a force that couldn't be ignored. Standing behind them was Ouyang Shua. Apart from the two governor-generals, the prefectural governors, prefectural magistrates, and even some county magistrates of the two provinces would be replaced. The descendants of the aristocratic families would all be taken down and replaced with officials who were trusted by the imperial court. In the face of the powerful Great Xia, these aristocratic families were powerless to resist. After the appointment of the governor-generals, the takeover of Great Zhou was basically set. Next, it was time to settle the prisoners of war. Because no war had broken out, according to the post-war statistics, after the various divisions of the Great Xia army had replenished their losses, there was still a total of 650,000 soldiers waiting to be reorganized. Just like before, Ouyang Shua wasn't in a hurry to reorganize the army. Because the war to eradicate Great Zhou was carried out exceptionally smoothly, there were basically no major wars. Ouyang Shua made a prompt decision and was prepared to follow up the victory by attacking the remaining three nations. Chapter 1246. With the surrender of the Great Zhou, the so-called alliance of the four countries was already dead. While rushing to Handan City, Ouyang Shua ordered the Chamberlain of Dependencies to send envoys to Qin, Tang, and Song, asking them to seriously consider submitting to the Great Xia. The Great Xia's unification of China is unstoppable and cannot be reversed by human power. I do not wish for the people of China to face the threat of war after resisting the natural disaster. If the kings of Qin, Tang, and Song are willing to submit, I will treat them with respect. I hope you will consider it carefully and give me an answer. Ouyang Shua said. On the 1st of June, Ouyang Shua returned to the capital, and so did the envoys. On the 5th of June, a week had passed since the envoys left, but there was still no reply from the three countries. Ouyang Shua realized that the three countries would not give up until they saw the coffin, and were prepared to fight to the death. The emperor's attachment to power was far deeper than Ouyang Shua imagined. He would rather die than submit. Since that was the case, he could only see the truth on the battlefield. On the 10th of June, after a short rest, the Hedong army returned to Hedong province. Together with the soaring Eagle army, they launched a pincer attack on the Qin dynasty from the east and west. Han Xian was still leading the Leopard army to monitor the Tang dynasty. To be on the safe side, Ouyang Shua ordered the Red Eagle army to lead the Second Corps of the Brave Tiger army westward from Ludong province to the Central Plains province to assist the Leopard army in deterring the Tang dynasty. Needless to say, Ouyang Shua's target was the Song dynasty. In order to reduce casualties, they had to pick on the weak. Among the three countries, the Song dynasty may have the largest territory, but in terms of overall national power, it was the weakest. Firstly, when Lord Chunshan retreated from Jingshu province, he brought half of the province's essence to Ludong province, leaving behind half an empty shell. Moreover, the Song dynasty had only taken over Ludong province for half a year and suffered from a rare natural disaster. They suffered heavy losses and had a weak foundation. Unlike the Qin and Tang dynasties, although they only occupied half a province, they had cultivated for 2 to 3 years. Secondly, compared to the Qin and Tang dynasties, the Song dynasty lacked famous generals and their soldiers lacked courage. The Qin dynasty had Wang Jian and Wang Bin, but the Tang dynasty was even more impressive. Even without the god of war Li Jing, they still had Li Ji, Hou Junji, Yuqi Jingde, and Cheng Yaojing. In comparison, the only general that the Great Song could send out was probably the Emperor Zhao Kuangyin. In order to destroy Great Song, Great Xia was prepared to mobilize the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Legions of the Yulin Royal Guards, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Legions of the Xiongjiang Army, and the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Legions of the Brave Tiger Army. A total of 10 legions, 700,000 soldiers. Throughout the middle of June, Great Xia was making final preparations for the War of Annihilation and the possible war between Qin and Tang. By the 25th of June, all the armies were in place. The rations and resources were also in place. A great battle was about to break out. On the 26th day of the 6th month, Su De commanded 3 corps of the Yulin Royal Guards and charged into Jingchu Province from the border of Xiangnan Province. At the same time, Zhang Shutua commanded the Xiang River Army to advance from Jiangchuan Province to Jingchu Province. The Brave Tiger Army under Sun Bin's command charged in from the border of Ainan Province. The 3 armies completely sealed off the south and east of the Song dynasty. They were prepared to advance steadily from the south to the north and from the east to the west. They were going to use the strategy of nibbling away at the Song dynasty and forcing it to surrender. Ouyang Shuo was very patient. At the same time, Di Chun and Lord Chunshin, as well as Imperial Wind, who was being reorganized, used their respective influence in Jingchu Province to instigate and create opportunities for the army. Zhao Kuangyin, who was unwilling to be killed, mobilized 500,000 Great Song Imperial Guards to obstruct them along the way. Looking at the situation, even if this was not an evenly matched war, it would be a protracted war. Even if Great Xia had the advantage in military strength, it would not be easy to conquer Jingchu Province. Once the war dragged on, it would be a lose-lose situation. At this moment, Li Jing, who had been leading his troops to attack Tubo, finally found the ghost behind the Tubo dynasty. It was the Ashoka dynasty of the Indian region, which lived next to Tubo. Mentioning the Ashoka dynasty gave Ouyang Shuo a headache. The number of players in the Indian region was similar to that of the Huaxia region, but there was only one king city, unlike the Huaxia region, which had 9 king cities. Such a setting created a freak dynasty. What did it mean for 5 million imperial guards to be gathered in one city? Even in the 7th year of Gaia, the number of imperial guards of the Ashoka dynasty still reached 4.5 million. Therefore, as early as last year, Ouyang Shuo realized that the biggest obstacle for Great Xia to conquer India in the future was not the Peacock dynasty, nor the Gudo dynasty, but the Ashoka dynasty that had always kept a low profile. After a few years of expansion, the Ashoka dynasty, with the king city of Delhi as its core, expanded to the surrounding areas. Today, it already occupied more than 1/3 of the territory of the Indian region. Not only was it a threat to Great Xia in the future, but it had also become a great threat to the Peacock dynasty and the Gudo dynasty. According to the information obtained by the Black Snake Guards, after the destruction of all the large territories, the Peacock dynasty and the Gudo dynasty showed signs of joining forces. Their purpose was to deal with their common enemy, the Ashoka dynasty. As long as the Ashoka dynasty existed, the 2 dynasties could forget about having the right to speak in the Indian region. Unexpectedly, Ashoka's ambition was so great that when the Peacock dynasty and the Gudo dynasty were joining forces, he could still find the energy to extend his tentacles into the Huaxia region. This was something that Ouyang Shuo could not tolerate. After reading the battle report submitted by Li Jing, Ouyang Shuo was silent for a long time before he said coldly, "Ashoka, since you've joined in, don't think about escaping unscathed. Do you really think that you could do whatever you want with 4 or 5 million troops? Men, here, pass the order to the front line. No matter the cost, we must end the battle to destroy the Song dynasty within half a month." Yes, the Ashoka dynasty's involvement in the Tubo War made Ouyang Shuo realize that he had to quickly end the war between the 3 countries, even if he had to pay the price of some casualties. Only then could he reorganize the army and deal with the threat of the Ashoka dynasty with all his might. Ouyang Shuo was really not sure if the Ashoka dynasty would take the opportunity of the Great Xia falling into the quagmire of war to continuously increase their troops in Tubo and pose a direct threat to the Flying Bear army led by Li Jing and even the western region of the dynasty. Ouyang Shuo could not take this risk. Summon Honglu Minister Zhang. Ouyang Shuo ordered. Yes. After a while, Zhang Yi hurried over. Previously, the Honglu Minister Zhang Yi had sent envoys to the 3 countries, but all of them returned with nothing. This made Zhang Yi very ashamed. As soon as he saw the emperor, he apologized to the emperor. The Honglu Minister Zhang Yi did not handle this matter well. Your Majesty, please punish me. Ouyang Shuo waved his hand, not wanting to pursue this matter. He only stared at Zhang Yi and said in a deep voice, "Send another envoy to Xiangyang and tell Zhao Kuangyin that the great Song dynasty has to surrender within 10 days. Otherwise, once Xiangyang is conquered, I will exterminate the entire Zhao family." Yes, Zhang Yi's heart trembled, and his back became wet. He had never seen the emperor so angry. Chapter 1247. Delhi City, Ashoka Dynasty, India District. The young king Ashoka looked at the Huaxia battle report in his hand, his eyes gleaming. This time, the central plains of Huaxia is finally going to have a tough battle. Good, very good. Based on Ashoka's understanding of emperors and wars, it was unlikely that Great Xia and Great Song would compromise at this stage. They could only fight to the death. This would inevitably affect the attitude of the Qin and Tang kingdoms. This is our chance. Just as Ouyang Shuo had guessed, Ashoka was a very ambitious emperor. 3 months ago, when the Tibetan Tsongpa contacted the Ashoka dynasty in fear, Ashoka realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Ashoka dynasty. Once they took the opportunity to annex Tibet, the Ashoka dynasty's territory would double. No emperor would be able to resist such a temptation. Ashoka did not hesitate at all. He directly divided them into 2 batches and very generously sent 300,000 troops to the Tibetan dynasty. In the process of fighting with Great Xia's Flying Bear army, he added another 200,000 troops. This also meant that the Ashoka dynasty had deployed 500,000 troops in Tibet, which had already exceeded the number of troops of the Tibetan dynasty. In order to reduce the Tibetan dynasty's logistical burden, Ashoka did not even hesitate to mobilize rations from the country. Ashoka did not hesitate to support the Tibetan dynasty at all costs. Of course, he did not have good intentions. The so-called cooperation must be built on the basis of the equal strength of both sides. The Ashoka dynasty's army was 10 times that of the Tibetan army, and the strength of both sides was not on the same level. The huge difference in strength also meant that the Tibetan dynasty was inviting a wolf into their house. When Songzan Gampo discovered this, it was already too late. The Ashoka dynasty's army stationed in Luaga City had already quietly controlled the city's vital points. It's easy to invite a god in, but difficult to send him away. Li Jing was an experienced general. After discovering the Tibetan army's tricks, he was not in a hurry to attack. He only set up camp at the border and closely watched the enemy, quietly investigating the enemy's strength. Seeing this, Songzan Gampo once mentioned to Ashoka, saying, "The Tibetan crisis has basically been resolved. Thank you for the Ashoka dynasty's assistance. The Tibetan dynasty will remember this great kindness." The underlying meaning was that he hoped the Ashoka dynasty would withdraw a portion of their army. In this regard, King Ashoka pretended to be deaf and dumb. He continued to stay in the Tubo dynasty with the excuse that the troops were exhausted from the long journey and needed to rest and reorganize on the spot and replenish their supplies. It could even be said that King Ashoka had deployed 500,000 troops to the border, ready to charge into the Tubo dynasty at any time. Only when he received the news did Songzan Gampo truly realize that something was wrong, but he was helpless. The weak Tubo dynasty was sandwiched between the 2 giant crocodiles of the Xia dynasty and the Ashoka dynasty. It was destined to become a victim, and the butcher's knife that Ashoka wielded was far more decisive than Songzan Gampo had expected. On the 28th day of the 6th month, just as the Chamberlain of Great Xia sent another envoy to Great Song, the Xia dynasty sent another 500,000 soldiers to the Tubo dynasty, directly taking control of the Tubo dynasty. Sonsen Gampo had become the puppet of the Ashoka dynasty. King Ashoka's plan could not be said to be not sinister. The reinforcements that were sent previously not only controlled some of the cities, but also took this opportunity to find out the geographical information of the entire Tubo dynasty under the guidance of the Tubo guides. In addition, the two armies fought side by side, allowing the Ashoka dynasty's army to infiltrate Tubo. Due to the secrecy of the Tubo incident, it was temporarily not discovered by the outside world. Even Ouyang Shua did not know that at the end of June, there was already a ferocious beast lurking in the western region of Great Xia. June 29th, Xiangyang City, Great Song Dynasty. Ouyang Shua's 7 days of surrender caused a huge uproar in the Great Song Dynasty. The imperial court was immediately divided into two factions. One faction wanted to surrender, and the other wanted to fight. It was very Northern Song Dynasty. Needless to say, the faction that wanted to surrender was naturally afraid of the Great Xia army and did not want to be buried with them. This was something that could not be helped. Even the Great Zhou Dynasty, which had 700,000 soldiers and was the most resolute in resisting Great Xia, had surrendered without a fight in the face of Great Xia's attack, much less the weaker Great Song. We also don't want the people of Great Song to be plunged into misery and suffering, said the minister who was in favor of surrendering. The pro-war faction was mainly composed of military generals, and their reasoning was very simple. Surrendering before the battle has even begun. Do you have any backbone? Even if we surrender, Great Xia will look down on us. Unfortunately, in the Great Song, generals had no right to speak. The real decision-maker was the group of civil officials, the Great Song Emperor, Zhao Kuangyin. Zhao Kuangyin was also very conflicted. On one hand, he could not let go of the pride and dignity of an emperor, and even more so, he could not let go of the foundation that he had painstakingly built up. Surrendering, he was not willing, but he also could not lower his head. But if he did not surrender, he would face the danger of being exterminated. Zhao Kuangyin did not doubt Emperor Xia's determination. If it really came to a point where they could not be separated, it was very normal for Emperor Xia to sacrifice Zhao Kuangyin's head. If it was Zhao Kuangyin, he would do the same. Zhao Kuangyin, who was in a dilemma, had no choice but to send envoys to the Qin and Tang kingdoms to seek the opinions of Emperor Qin and Emperor Taizong of Tang. If they surrendered, then all three nations would surrender at the same time. That way, they would be able to look better. If they didn't surrender, then the two nations wouldn't be able to sit idly by and watch Great Song get destroyed just because they were being monitored by the Great Xia army. When a nest is overturned, there are no intact eggs. Please think carefully. The day the Great Song is destroyed will be the day the Qin and Tang kingdoms are destroyed. Rather than surrendering in humiliation, why not fight to our heart's content? Zhao Kuangyin spoke passionately, but his real purpose was to let the Qin and Tang kingdoms share some of the pressure on the Great Song. Only he knew his real thoughts and plans. I hope it works. Zhao Kuangyin made a final struggle. Jingchu Province, Jingzhou County. After reading the emperor's military order, the commander of the Yulin Royal Guards, Su De, shouted, "Men, here, summon all the generals and discuss matters in the tent." "Yes, sir." No matter how the civil and military officials of the Great Song argued, after receiving the emperor's order to conquer the Great Song within half a month, the three armies of the Great Xia moved quickly. The emperor's military order was very clear. The army of the three armies that conquered Xiangyang City first will be heavily rewarded by the imperial court. Although the Yulin Royal Guards, the Xiangyang Army, and the Brave Tiger Army belonged to the three armies, none of them were willing to submit to the other. In the army, strength does not depend on one's background, but on one's military achievements. For the Yulin Royal Guards, the significance of this battle was even greater. Firstly, this was the first major battle that Commander Su De had fought since joining Great Xia. Among the many famous generals in the Great Xia army, Su De really needed to use this battle to prove that he was worthy of his rank as a general and worthy of Her Majesty's high regard. Secondly, the Yulin Royal Guards was a new army. They needed this battle to complete the internal run-in and to test the results of their training. They needed to truly integrate the soldiers from various departments into a whole. In Su Da's words, "I hope that after this battle, there will be no distinction between the Jin army, the Ming army, or the Sui army. We will only have one name, the soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards." The left wing that the Yulin Royal Guards was in charge of was the most dangerous route. Not only did they have to fight against the Great Song army, but they also had to guard against the Tang army crossing the border and intercepting them. That was why Ouyang Shua gave this heavy responsibility to Su Da. On the same day, Su Da mobilized the entire army, declaring that they would conquer Xiangyang at all costs and show the might of the Yulin Royal Guards. Almost at the same time, the Xiangyang army in the middle and the Brave Tiger army on the right also mobilized. The 700,000 Great Xia soldiers were like a pack of ferocious tigers baring their fangs at the Great Song Imperial Army. The battle to exterminate the Song dynasty entered its most intense phase. On the 3rd of July, the Xiangyang army in the middle took the lead. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after a day and a half of fierce fighting, with the help of the spies in the city and under the personal command of Zhang Shuda, the commander of the Xiangyang army, the army finally captured Danyang City. They beheaded more than 30,000 people and achieved a great victory. As the former capital of the territory, Danyang City was not only the second largest city in the Great Song, but it was also the strongest fortress in the south. Together with Xiangyang City in the north, they formed the cornerstone of the Great Song. In Danyang City, the Great Song stationed 150,000 imperial soldiers and stored a large amount of provisions. It was the most important bridgehead for the Song army to stop the Great Xia army from advancing north. However, Danyang City was originally under the control of Lord Chunshin. Although he was forced to hand it over to the Great Song, Lord Chunshin still had a lot of influence in Danyang City. This time, the Xiangyang army was able to successfully conquer Danyang City because of the help from the inside. Otherwise, with the strong defense of Danyang City and the 150,000 imperial soldiers, even with Zhang Shutua's ability, it would take him at least a week to conquer Danyang City. The Great Xia army used only a day and a half to conquer Danyang City, giving the Song imperial court a wake-up call. When the news reached Xiangyang, the Song imperial court was shaken again. Chapter 1248. The fall of Danyang City was like a wake-up call to the Song dynasty. The voices of those who wanted to surrender overpowered those who wanted to fight. It seemed that surrender was the only option for the Song dynasty. However, at this moment, the news that the Indian Ashoka dynasty had taken over the Tubo dynasty and was preparing to fight with the Xia dynasty spread across the land of Huaxia. It gave Zhao Kuangyin, who was already in despair, a glimmer of hope. Wait a little longer. Maybe the Xia dynasty will retreat, Zhao Kuangyin thought. Zhao Kuangyin wanted to wait a little longer, but the other officials of the Song dynasty did not. There was only one day left before the surrender deadline given by the Xia emperor. This 7 days of surrender was like a butcher's knife hanging over the head of the Zhao family. In the eyes of the nobles and officials, even if the Ashoka dynasty threatened the western border of the Xia dynasty, with the power of the Xia dynasty, they could still stabilize the western defense line and take care of the Song dynasty at the same time. When that time came, they would have to die with the emperor. The Song dynasty wanted to endure, while the other side wanted to stay alive. There was an irreconcilable and life-and-death conflict between the two sides. When Zhao Kuangyin made it clear that he wanted to hold on, the conflict finally broke out. Night of July 3rd. With the support of the officials, Prince Jin, Zhao Guangyi, started a rebellion and put his brother, Zhao Kuangyin, under house arrest. History seemed to be repeating itself once again. On the 19th of October in the 9th year of the treasure, Zhao Kuangyin summoned Zhao Guangyi to the palace for a drink. On the morning of the 20th, Zhao Kuangyin suddenly died. On the 21st, Prince Jin, Zhao Guangyi, ascended the throne as Emperor Taizong of the Song dynasty. The death of Emperor Taizong and the death of Emperor Taizong of the Song dynasty left the eternal mystery of the shadow of the axe. No matter what, with the success of Zhao Guangyi's rebellion, the fate of the Song dynasty had been settled. The next morning, Zhao Guangyi represented the Song dynasty and announced that he would surrender to the Xia dynasty. The world was shocked when the news came out. Imperial City, Jingshi. The cold winter seemed to be yesterday, but in the blink of an eye, it was already summer. After half a year of construction, the Imperial City's renovation project was almost completed. With the injection of a large amount of capital, the new urban area began to be revitalized and became the new engine of the dynasty's economic growth. Almost every week, new things were produced from the factories in the new urban area. In recent days, there had been a bicycle craze among the nobles of the capital, especially for young men. Riding a Mountain Eagle bicycle was a matter of great honor. If there were still any young masters riding horses, then they would truly be outdated. The Mountain Eagle Bicycle Factory's realization of assembly line production not only meant that bicycles would be rapidly popularized in the capital, but it also meant that a new assembly line production model would soon replace the inefficient small workshops. The industrialization of Great Xia had reached a new level. The development of the new city district was inseparable from the support of a group of people, and that was the adventurer players who had resumed their old profession. According to the statistics provided by the industry department, in half a year, 150,000 industrial workers were recruited in the new district alone. With the development of the new urban area on the fast track, the number of workers continued to increase. At the beginning of the year, Great Xia opened its doors to adventurer players. More and more players completed their identity changes. Workers, doctors, teachers, merchants, farmers, and civil servants could all find their positions in Great Xia and obtain a place for themselves. Human resources were fully released, and Great Xia's economy ushered in rapid growth. In just the past 5 months, the Great Xia Imperial Court had collected as much as 17 million gold coins in taxes. It was easy for the annual tax revenue to exceed the 200 million mark. With the help of the Great Xia Bank, the Great Xia Commercial Bank, the Great Xia Agricultural Bank, and the recently restructured Huitong Bank, the Great Xia currency was promoted. Massive amounts of gold coins were recycled, turned into gold bricks, and stored in the Great Xia treasury. When a game was released, Gaia directly injected a massive amount of gold coins into the wilderness through the drop of monsters, mission rewards, and shops in the capital, activating the entire trading system. Gold coins also became a global currency. As the game continued to move in the direction of realism, Gaia's involvement in the game continued to decrease, and the capital continued to fall. The increment of gold coins was mainly completed through the territory's gold mines. This also meant that the status of gold coins as a global currency was being challenged day by day. According to the laws of economic development, a pure hard currency like gold coins was not the best currency. It was inevitable that it would be eliminated. The dynasty that established a stable new currency system first would benefit first. As the Great Xia currency was circulated among the people, gold coins were more often used to create ornaments and not as currency. In just half a year, the gold and silver ornaments on the market increased by 4 to 5 times. This showed that the spending power of Great Xia citizens was increasing day by day. It stimulated domestic demand and became another engine of economic growth. All in all, Great Xia was undergoing a profound internal transformation. The atmosphere of the feudal dynasty gradually faded away and was replaced by a vibrant new nation. It was also because of this that the elites of China began to take the initiative to lean towards Great Xia. The Great Xia officialdom was ushering in a change of old and new. As the emperor, Ouyang Shuo was very happy to see that the dynasty was constantly being replaced and not stagnant. He did not wish for the expansion of the imperial court to be hindered by the interests of the country. Change was the main theme of Great Xia for the past 6 months. The changes were like a dream. Just by taking a nap, one would be able to keep up with the trend. Even the Hall of Diligent Government, where Ouyang Shuo usually worked, welcomed a seemingly inconspicuous but significant change. Just a few days ago, the Construction Bureau completed the renovation of the Hall of Diligent Government according to Ouyang Shuo's instructions. The change was actually very small. It was just a large room beside the imperial study, with a long square table and sandalwood chairs. It was transformed into an ancient and very modern conference room. Ouyang Shuo called it the first conference room. From then on, whether it was military or political discussions, unless it was required by etiquette, Ouyang Shuo would not hold them in the martial heroic hall or the hall of literary glory. Instead, he would choose the first conference room. In the conference room, everyone sat together. There was no need to look up to the emperor, Ouyang Shuo. Ouyang Shuo also did not have the patience to sit on the cold dragon throne all day and discuss matters with the civil and military officials. The real authority of the emperor was not established through such boring ceremonies. The imperial court also welcomed a few new people. On the 15th of June, after completing the handover of the imperial style, Peerless Elegance officially took office in the secret literature pavilion. Ouyang Shuo appointed him as the scholar in charge of the organization of intelligence, according to the agreement. In layman's terms, Peerless Elegance was Ouyang Shuo's intelligence secretary. This appointment had clearly surprised Peerless Elegance, because no matter where it was, intelligence was a highly classified secret, especially when it was reported to Ouyang Shuo's level. The position of intelligence secretary had to be held by Ouyang Shuo's most trusted person. But Ouyang Shuo had chosen Peerless Elegance, who had just submitted. Not only was Peerless Elegance surprised, the other officials were also surprised. They all looked at Peerless Elegance with strange gazes. But Ouyang Shuo was unmoved. He had always adhered to a single principle: don't doubt the people you use, and don't use the people you doubt. Placing suitable talents into suitable positions was Ouyang Shuo's most important and most difficult task. Peerless Elegance had been in charge of the imperial style for a long time, and he was unquestionably the best candidate for intelligence secretary. As for Peerless Elegance's loyalty, the Mountain Sea Guard was responsible for monitoring him. Before Peerless Elegance took office, Di Chun, who had rushed to the capital to take up his post, had already left the capital with a few guards to travel the world. Ouyang Shuo could understand Di Chun's mood and knew that Di Chun needed some time to adjust. Thus, he did not place any hard and fast rules on Di Chun's work, only giving him some funds to work with. Di Chun had a lot of flexibility in how to operate. Ouyang Shuo also believed in Di Chun's judgment of people. Since Di Chun had accepted the position of Chamberlain of Dependency's minister and the imperial court's special envoy, he could not just sit there and do nothing. He was bound to want to achieve outstanding results in this position. All Di Chun needed was a little time to adjust. The only thing that surprised Ouyang Shuo was that after the Great Zhou surrendered, old General Lien Po voluntarily gave up his military post and willingly stayed by Di Chun's side as an ordinary guard captain. Their previous relationship as ruler and official had turned into that of master and servant. Since this was Lien Po's choice, Ouyang Shuo did not force it and let nature take its course. Presumably, with Di Chun's achievements, he should be able to materialize a Lien Po. Besides Lien Po, the old officials of the Great Zhou dynasty also had new posts. Advisor Fan Zeng stayed in the capital to enjoy his retirement, no longer serving as an official. Great General Zhang Hong Fan of the Yuan dynasty, whom Ouyang Shuo despised, had tactfully left the Great Zhou on the day the Great Zhou surrendered and concealed his identity. Not everyone could adapt to the Great Xia and start a new life. With the power of the Mountain Sea Guards, they could naturally find Zhang Hongfan's hiding place. However, Ouyang Shuo did not do so. Since Zhang Hongfan was very tactful, Ouyang Shuo did not hesitate to spare his life. Among the old officials of the Great Zhou dynasty, only the Japanese General Toyotomi Hideyoshi was truly appointed. He was arranged by Ouyang Shuo to join the Halua army and take up the position of army commander. At this point, the last trace of the Great Zhou dynasty had disappeared. The afternoon sun was still scorching. It shone through the green leaves outside the window and through the grill, casting a long shadow on Ouyang Shuo's body. In front of the table, Ouyang Shuo was taking a nap with his eyes closed. The Asoka dynasty's annexation of the Tufan dynasty, the great Song dynasty's change in the palace, and the recent upheavals had caught Ouyang Shua unprepared. For a moment, he actually felt a little tired. He took the opportunity of his afternoon nap to organize his thoughts. Chapter 1249. Ouyang Shua did not expect the Tubo dynasty to be occupied by the Ashoka dynasty. Songzan Gampo resisted the Mongolian Empire in the north and defended the great Xia dynasty in the west. In the end, he still could not escape the fate of being devoured by the giant crocodile. It was truly regrettable. Speaking of which, this was the first time a foreign force had intervened in the struggle for supremacy in Huaxia. It made Ouyang Shua feel embarrassed. Even so, Ouyang Shua had no choice but to be careful. A few days ago, Li Jing had already led the Flying Bear army back to the border of Shu. The first expedition of the great Xia dynasty ended in failure. Li Jing asked for forgiveness, but was suppressed by Ouyang Shua. Given the treacherous situation of the Tubo battlefield, it was already a very impressive achievement for Li Jing to be able to lead the Flying Bear army and retreat unscathed. How could Ouyang Shua punish this general? Before dealing with the Qin, Tang, and Song kingdoms, Ouyang Shua did not intend to start a war with Tubo. As for the Ashoka dynasty, they had to go through a process of digestion and absorption after annexing such a large territory. Furthermore, Shu was easy to defend and difficult to attack. As long as Ashoka was not too arrogant, he would not be greedy. Putting Tubo aside for the time being, Ouyang Shua focused his attention on the Qin, Tang, and Song kingdoms. As the deadline approached on the 3rd of July, Ouyang Shua was prepared to sacrifice the Zhao family of the Great Song dynasty. He did not expect a dramatic change in the Great Song dynasty the night before. Zhao Guangyi had saved the entire family. However, the people of the future would probably regard Zhao Guangyi as a traitor and Zhao Kuangyin as the saint of the generation. Ouyang Shua had no intention of investigating. He only knew that with the success of Zhao Guangyi's palace change, Jingchu province had already become the possession of the Great Xia dynasty. The Great Xia dynasty was a big step closer to destroying the three kingdoms. On the 5th of July, Jiang Shang, the chief minister of the Great Xia dynasty, led a team to Xiangyang City to accept Zhao Guangyi's surrender. Before that, the two armies had already stopped fighting. The Great Song Imperial Army at the front line surrendered and waited for the Privy Council to reorganize. After a rough calculation, there were still 380,000 Great Song Imperial Army waiting to be reorganized. Jiangshang also brought the imperial court's grace and title. The edict conferred Zhao Guangyi the title of King Song and Zhao Kuangyin. This kind of grace was already considered the great grace of the emperor. Zhao Kuangyin, who was under house arrest, would be too insensible if he was dissatisfied. Apart from the Zhao royal family, the old ministers of the Great Song also had their own appointments. Zhao Pu was appointed as the governor of southern Sichuan, and the former governor of southern Sichuan, Fan Zhongyan, was transferred to the governor of Jingchu. In his early years, Zhao Pu was appointed by Liu Xi as a secretary, and later became Zhao Kuangyin's secretary. In the 7th year of Xinda, he and Zhao Kuangyin launched the Chenxiao Mutiny, overthrowing the later Zhou and establishing the Song dynasty. In the 2nd year of Xinda, he became the prime minister and assisted Zhao Kuangyin in seizing the military towns, removing the imperial guard generals from military power, implementing the garrison law, reforming the official system, and formulating many important measures to defend the borders of Liaoning. In the 3rd year of Chunhua, Zhao Pu, who had paid his respect to the prime minister 3 times, died of illness at the age of 71. He was conferred the title of Prince of Han and given the title of Zhongxian. He was also given a banquet in the Taizu Temple and was one of the 24 heroes of the Zhao Sun Pavilion. Although Zhao Pu did not read much, he liked to read the Analects of Confucius. His saying that half of the Analects of Confucius governs the world had a great impact on the later generations and became a famous saying of ruling the country with Confucianism. With Zhao Pu's talent, it was naturally not a problem for him to be appointed as the governor of a province. However, it was still unexpected for him to be appointed as the governor of southern Sichuan. Although the rumor that southern Chuan province was going to become Zhili province was suppressed by Ouyang Shua, there was no need to doubt the high status of southern Chuan province. Ouyang Shua's real purpose was to transfer Fanzhongyan out of southern Sichuan. As Jingshu province had the royal city of Xiangyang and was a large province in the central region, Fanzhongyan would not be wronged. Ouyang Shua hoped that through this adjustment, Fanzhongyan would understand the hidden meaning of his warning. Other than Zhao Pu, Murong Yin Zhao, Gao Huaid, Wang Xinqi, Han Lingquan, Shi Shouxin, Zhang Ling Duo, Zhang Guanghan, Zhao Yanwei, and the other old ministers of the Great Song were also arranged. The Northern Song had no generals, and the Southern Song had no prime minister. Among the old ministers, Zhao Pu was the only one who truly excelled in both literature and martial arts. With the surrender of the Great Song, the situation in the Huaxia region had become clear. Now, it depended on the attitude of the Qin and Tang kingdoms. Whether it was Emperor Qin or Emperor Taizong, they were not people who would easily admit defeat. It was harder to make the two of them surrender than to kill them. The capital, the imperial palace. Zhang Liang, the secretary of the secretariat, was invited to the imperial study for a discussion. Dear subject, how do you think we should deal with the Qin and Tang kingdoms? If possible, Ouyang Shua did not want to subdue the two countries through war under the overbearing situation of the Ashoka dynasty. But if they did not fight, the two countries would not surrender. This had become a dead knot. That was why Ouyang Shua asked Zhang Liang to think of a solution. Zhang Liang replied, Emperor Qin and Emperor Taizong are also heroes of their generation. They must be able to see the situation clearly and know that the situation cannot be reversed. What we need to do is to give them a way out. Ouyang Shua nodded in agreement. Dear subject, how do you think we should give them a way out? Do you want us to talk to them personally? That's not appropriate. Zhang Liang shook his head. Putting aside the fact that your majesty is the most respected person in the world, we cannot lower our status. If we break this rule, it will affect the arrogance of the Qin and Tang kingdoms. It will be very disadvantageous to the governance of the Guangxi province in the future. Zhang Liang's concern was not an alarmist. Both the Qin and Tang kingdoms had a group of famous civil and military officials. Moreover, the two countries had been in the Guangxi province for a long time and had deep roots. If Great Xia gave the two countries too much face, it would easily give the civil and military officials and the people of the two countries the wrong impression that they were giving face to Great Xia by submitting to Great Xia. It would inevitably lead to arrogance. This was what Ouyang Shua did not want to see. Zhang Liang said, This humble subject thinks that we can start with the Ashoka dynasty. What do you mean? Ouyang Shua was a little surprised. He did not know how the two could be linked together. Whether it is Emperor Qin or Emperor Taizong, they're the emperors of China. Now that foreign enemies are knocking on China's door, if the Qin and Tang kingdoms are still immersed in internal strife, wouldn't they be letting down the name of China? This humble subject suggests that we send a high-level envoy group again and use this as a breakthrough to convince the two emperors to retreat behind the scenes. Zhang Liang said. Ouyang Shua frowned slightly. Will this work? If your majesty does not give up, this humble subject is willing to personally lead a team to one of the countries. All right. Ouyang Shua readily accepted the advice and decided to let Zhang Liang give it a try. On the 7th day of the 7th month, Great Xia's cabinet's second assistant minister and minister in charge of seals, Zhang Liang, led a team to the Tang dynasty. At the same time, Honglu Temple's minister, Zhang Yi, personally led a team to the Qin dynasty. In history, Zhang Yi was once the prime minister of the Qin kingdom. This diplomatic mission to the Qin kingdom could be considered as a glorious return. Ouyang Shua hoped that Qin Shi Huang would consider this and agree to retire. Ouyang Shua could put the civil and military officials in important positions, but the emperors were the absolute forbidden zone. Ouyang Shua was unwilling to touch them and would never have the intention to take them under his command. Even Xiang Yu, the overlord of Chu, was not willing to be in the hearts of the people, let alone emperors like Emperor Qin and Emperor Taizong. If he really recruited these emperors, there would be endless troubles in the future. Therefore, even if the Qin and Tang kingdoms surrendered, Emperor Qin and Emperor Taizong could only retire and be idle kings in this game world. They would no longer interfere with the state affairs and could not even touch it. As for whether there would be an opportunity in the future to instantiate these emperors on planet Hope and expand the territory, that was another matter. After all, there were still too many variables on planet Hope, and how could Ouyang Xuan know everything? During the period when Zhang Liang and Zhang Yi were on the diplomatic mission, the Great Xia army did not move and quietly waited for the results of the negotiations between both parties. If the two countries were still unwilling to surrender, Ouyang Xuan could only resolve it through war in order to avoid any unforeseen circumstances. Chapter 1250. July 7th. Great Qin Dynasty, Xianyang City. In the palace, the middle-aged Qin Shi Huang stood with his back facing Qin Shi Huang as he stared at the map of China in the wilderness. Great Qin's territory was only a small piece. He asked, "Li Si, Great Xia is here. Zhang Yi is leading the team?" Just his back view alone was enough to give one immense pressure. This was the prestige of Qin Shi Huang. "Yes, your majesty." What did they say? Qin Shi Huang did not turn around. Li Si secretly wiped the beads of sweat on his forehead and said, They hope that your majesty can go into seclusion." Qin Shi Huang was silent. After a long while, Qin Shi Huang turned around and looked at Wang Jian with a cold glint in his eyes. "If we start a war with Great Xia, what are our chances of winning?" Wang Jian thought for a moment and replied, "We can fight." The meaning behind this sentence was worth pondering. In history, Wang Jian and his son massacred the 6 states due to many factors. At that time, Qin was strong and the Qin army was strong while the 6 states had been decaying for a long time and were only left with an empty shell. That was why Qin was able to unify the 6 states in a short 10 years. Qin's road to unifying the 6 states started with Xiangyang's reform and was the result of the efforts of several generations of emperors. Qin Shi Huang only completed the final blow and did not dare to be greedy. In the wilderness, Qin was trapped in a corner and the Qin army had no battle experience. Their opponent, Great Xia, had a vast territory and a strong army. Even when the Qin kingdom was at its peak in history, it was still far behind. The two were completely different in strength. That was why Wang Jian said, "We can fight," implying that they could not win. Qin Shi Huang looked deeply at Wang Jian and Li Si and waved his hand tiredly. "Both of you can leave." "Yes." That night, Qin Shi Huang left behind an edict to pass the throne to his eldest son, Fu Su, before committing suicide. This was how an emperor ended his journey in the wilderness. At the last moment of his life, Qin Shi Huang looked at the sky and said, "Mother Goddess, I should not have come." Gaia was silent. At the moment Qin Shi Huang committed suicide, a huge meteor streaked across the night sky. Capital Imperial City. Ouyang Xuan, who was still reading the memorials, seemed to have sensed something. He got up and walked to the window and saw the dazzling meteor flashing past like a comet. Northwest. Ouyang Xuan fell into deep thought. He wondered if it was Qin Shi Huang or Tang Taizong who had fallen. "This is not what I want, but I have no choice." At this moment, Ouyang Xuan was filled with melancholy. Whether it was Emperor Qin or Emperor Taizong of Tang, Ouyang Xuan only had respect for them. However, the situation had forced him to do so. In this vast wilderness, there was no room for both of them. On the road to hegemony, there are many such helpless choices. Tang Dynasty, Chang and City. Tang Taizong, Li Shiming, gaze at the dazzling meteor in silence. "You finally made your choice. What about me? What should I do?" Accompanying Emperor Taizong was a virtuous empress, Empress Zhang's son. "Your Majesty, this concubine has always been looking forward to accompanying your Majesty to travel the world," Empress Zhang's son said with a smile. Li Shiming burst into laughter. "Well, It doesn't matter whether I fight for it or not. I might as well let it go. Between family and power, Li Shimin chose the latter. Holding Empress Zhongxuan's warm and slender hand, Li Shimin's lips curled into a smile. On the 8th of July, young Master Fu Su ascended to the throne. On the same day, the new king of Qin, Fu Su, agreed to surrender to Great Xia's special envoy Zhang Yi. Fu Su ascended to the throne and rewrote the history of Qin, but it seemed that nothing had changed. The only change was that in the following days, Fu Su would take the title of king of Qin and lead the Ying family to continue to exist. Such an ending really made people sigh. On the 10th of July, Emperor Taizong Li Shiming passed the throne to Prince Jin Li Ji, who was also known as Emperor Gaozong of Tang in history. After that, Li Shiming and his wife, Zhang Sun Wugo, disappeared from the eyes of the world and officially went into seclusion. Before going into seclusion, Li Shiming ordered Wu Zetian to die. Although the Li family could no longer be as glorious as in history, Li Shiming did not want his family to be destroyed by a woman. The two emperors expressed their pride in different ways. On the 11th of July, Jingshi, Zhang Liang's plan succeeded. Great Xia conquered Qin and Tang in a peaceful way. At this point, except for the Mongolian Empire and Tubo, which was annexed by the Ashoka dynasty, the entire territory of Huaxia belonged to Great Xia. The 9 royal cities all belonged to Great Xia. It was hard for outsiders to imagine what this meant, but in the eyes of the Chinese players, this was a great achievement that could be recorded in the history books. To the Chinese, they were hopelessly obsessed with unification. In the first year of Gaia, thousands of feudal lords struggled to survive in the wilderness. To the third year of Gaia, to the battle between Great Xia and Great Zhou, and finally to Great Xia's unification of Huaxia. The entire process took Ouyang Shua less than 7 years. If it wasn't for the game time, this would be impossible. After all, the game map was expanded by 10 times, and from a small village, he had climbed step by step to the current illustrious dynasty. Ouyang Shua was destined to become a legend. When Qin and Tang successively surrendered to Great Xia, the news had already spread throughout the world and attracted the attention of various parties. Dawson Dynasty, Liberty City. After learning that Great Xia had conquered Qin, Tang, and Song, Jack was speechless for a long time. This Eastern dragon is finally going out to sea. When he said this, Jack's eyes were filled with excitement, but there was also a hint of worry. After the unification of Huaxia, the Great Xia dynasty would definitely focus on overseas expeditions in the future. They would fight head-on with the Dawson dynasty and even the entire Silver Hand. The moment that Jack had been looking forward to was finally coming, but he didn't know who would be the winner. It's time to make a good plan. Mediterranean Sea, Atlantis City. Queen Kalia stood on the tower, staring at the vast sea. Will he come back? Kalia didn't believe that Great Xia, which had suffered a huge setback in Morocco, wouldn't return to the Mediterranean Sea after unifying Huaxia. The Mediterranean Sea is going to have huge waves again. I'm really looking forward to it. As the territories in the Mediterranean Sea were annexed one by one, Atlantis was facing the attacks of the Spanish dynasty, Gaul dynasty, Caesar dynasty, Arabia dynasty, and Egypt dynasty. At this time, Kalia especially hoped to get the full support of Great Xia. It was time to stir up the stagnant Mediterranean Sea. Indian Empire, Cusco City. After receiving the news that Great Xia had conquered 3 countries, Indian King Juarez didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. He had to admit that in the past few months, the Indian Empire had been having a hard time facing the attacks of the Spanish dynasty and the Brasilia dynasty. They were already somewhat unable to control the situation. Should we let Great Xia intervene? Juarez still couldn't make up his mind. The Indians had their own pride. Chapter 1251. 15th of July, Jingshi. The commotion caused by the surrender of Qin and Tang had gradually subsided, and the war in the Central Plains had come to an end. The greatest benefit of conquering Zhou, Song, Qin, and Tang was that they had gained nearly 100 million people. Including the Kenyan countries that were conquered in the African battlefield, Great Sia's population had gone up another level, breaking the 500 million mark. Be it in terms of population or territory, Great Xia had already surpassed any other dynasty in history. The sudden influx of a large number of people had also placed a certain burden on the imperial court. Fortunately, the weather was favorable this year, and the first harvest of food was bountiful, finally alleviating the hunger situation that had occurred since last winter. The natural disaster of last October had also brought about a sequela. Be it farmers or herdsmen, they had all subconsciously hoarded large amounts of food at home to prepare for the famine. In the words of the commoners, I don't want to experience that kind of cold winter again. Following the unification of the Central Plains and the rise of peace, the commoners lived in prosperity and contentment. The indigenous population of Great Xia was about to usher in an explosive growth, becoming a new growth point for the population. Children born in the first year of Gaia had already become adults in the seventh year of Gaia. Their generation had grown up with the dynasty, and they were the most loyal and the most active generation. They were the cornerstone of the country. Just like the Shadow Guard's guardian Shui Tianqi, the youth who had come to Shanghai Village had already grown into an unyielding young talent, becoming a sharp sword in the darkness of the night for Ouyang Shua. At 10 in the morning, in the imperial study, Ouyang Shua was discussing personnel arrangements with Jiang Shang, Ko Zhuan, and Zhang Tingyu. This included the arrangements for the old officials of Qin and Tang, as well as the selection of the Guangxi province's governor. In addition, there were personnel related to the Protectorate of Africa. In the past 3 months, Great Xia had launched a war of unification within the country, and the distant battlefield in Africa had not stopped. Under the command of Bai Qi, the 4 armies in the African theater of operations had won every battle. On the 10th of April, they conquered Uganda, and on the 18th, they conquered Tanzania, completing the second tier of military operations. During this period, Bai Qi had also taken advantage of the time when the army was resting to destroy 2 small countries, Rwanda and Burundi. Rwanda was bordered by Tanzania to the east, Burundi to the south, Congo to the west and northwest, and Uganda to the north. It had many mountains within its territory and was known as the country of thousand hills. Although Rwanda's land area was smaller than Jingzhou Island, it had 1 million players. It was the most densely populated country in Africa, with about 83% of the population distributed in the villages. Tungsten and forest resources were the specialties of Rwanda. As for Burundi, which bordered Rwanda, it had a slightly larger land area than Rwanda. It had around 800,000 players, and it was also mainly farming. In modern society, these small African countries did not have an industrial base, and their infrastructure was backward, so they were doing very badly. However, in the game world, the unique natural environment was a rare granary. The imperial court decided to merge Uganda into the Kenya province. At the same time, with Tanzania as the main body, it would annex the 2 small countries of Rwanda and Burundi to establish the Tanzania province, which is also the 4th province of the Protectorate of Africa. The position of Tanzania province's governor was temporarily vacant and was being taken over by the Protectorate of Africa. After a short rest, in late May, the African Theater of Operations launched the 3rd phase of military operations. This time, the targets were Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. Malawi was located in the southeast of Africa. It was a landlocked country surrounded by Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zambia. Its land area was about the same as the East Sea province, with a total of 3 million players. The country got its name from Lake Malawi, which was also the 3rd largest lake in Africa. It had an area of 30,000 square kilometers, and the deepest lake could reach more than 700 meters. There were many species of freshwater fish that were unique in the world. Malawi's economy was mainly based on agriculture. The main cash crops included tobacco, coffee, tea, cotton, and sugarcane. Tobacco was the most important cash crop in Malawi. Mozambique, which was next to Malawi, also bordered Lake Malawi. It was once a Portuguese colony and its land area was about the same as the Qinghai province. There were a total of 5 million players. In addition, Mozambique was a coastal country, located in the southeast of Africa. The Mozambique Channel between Mozambique and Madagascar was the world's longest channel, with a total length of 1,670 kilometers. There were many rivers in Mozambique, and the climate was hot and humid. The annual average temperature was 194 degrees Celsius. There was an abundance of rain, and it was rich in marine, water, and forest resources. It was a heaven for eating tuna and seafood, and there were many species of sharks in the north. It could be said that Mozambique was a treasure trove of natural resources. It was no wonder that it was coveted by the Portuguese. Lastly, there was Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was an important birthplace of civilization in southern Africa. During the Middle Ages, there was a civilization established by the Shona people, and many cultural relics were left behind. The most important one was the ancient city of Great Zimbabwe, which was how Zimbabwe got its name. The Mohamtaba Empire, which used this city as its capital, through trade with the Muslim caravans from the Indian Ocean coast, gradually became stronger in the 11th century. They used the gold, ivory, and copper produced there to exchange for raw products from the Persian Gulf region, such as cloth and glass. In the 15th century, the Mohamtaba Empire had become the largest state in southern Africa. Zimbabwe was a country with a more developed industry in Africa. Manufacturing, agriculture, and mining were the three pillars of its economy. It was famous for producing high-quality crocodile skin and was known as the home of the crocodile. Zimbabwe's land area was about the same as the Yunnan province, and it had a total of 1 million players. It was not difficult to find that, other than Rwanda, the countries in East Africa generally had low population density, and they were rich in natural resources. They had a history of colonization, and their industries were backward, but the climate was pleasant. All these factors made it the best raw material production base. As the first industrial revolution spread throughout the world, regions like this became a treasure land coveted by various tyrants. This resulted in the 7 Years of Gaia, where the global dynasties divided up the African continent. By the end of June, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe had all been conquered by Great Sia. The imperial court decided to annex Malawi and Zimbabwe, with Mozambique as the core, to establish the Mozambique province. At this point, Great Sia's East Africa strategy had basically come to an end. After conquering the last country, Zimbabwe, the African war zone would enter a relatively long period of rest and reorganization. They would focus on consolidating their internal defenses and would no longer wage war against other countries. There were 3 reasons for this ceasefire. Firstly, in a short period of half a year, the African war zone had consecutively conquered 9 countries. The generals and soldiers were exhausted, and the provisions provided by the imperial court had basically been depleted. They could no longer sustain the war and had to rest and reorganize. Even if they were an iron army, it was impossible for them to wage war all the time. Secondly, the Protectorate of Africa had established 4 new provinces. The territory had expanded by more than 4 times, and the population had increased by more than 30 million. The rate of expansion was too fast, and they had to stop and digest it. Otherwise, there would be endless troubles in the future. Don't forget, after conquering the 9 countries, the players of the 9 countries wouldn't be teleported to the training grounds. They would still remain in their own territories. This raised a higher requirement for Great Sia's governance. The governors of the newly established Tanzania province and Mozambique province had yet to be decided. Thirdly, there was no longer any place to conquer in East Africa. To the south of the Mozambique province was the Bantu dynasty, and it was temporarily inadvisable to clash with them. To the north and east of the Protectorate of Africa was the Indian Ocean. Apart from Madagascar, Mauritius, and other island countries, there was no other place to conquer. The only target of attack could only be the west. To the west, apart from Zambia, which shared a border with Zimbabwe, the Congo, Central Africa, and other countries belonged to the Central Africa region. They were the main targets of the Dawson dynasty. While Great Xia was conquering the countries in East Africa, the Dawson dynasty had already conquered Cameroon, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea. Their next target would most likely be the Congo. In history, the Congo had been divided into the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the game world, it was one country. Its territory was larger than 10 Yunnan provinces, and the total number of players was as high as 8 million. Regardless of whether it was the Dawson dynasty or the Great Xia, it wouldn't be easy to conquer the Congo. If both sides were to interfere with each other, the situation would become even more complicated. The Congo would most likely become the first place where the two dynasties would clash. It was precisely because of this that Ouyang Shua had ordered a temporary truce in the African war zone to reorganize their defenses. At the same time, he had to coordinate with the Protectorate to reorganize the internal affairs of the Protectorate and stabilize East Africa. As long as the development of East Africa was on the right track, it would be able to support the consumption of the four armies by itself, and there would be no need for resources from the Protectorate. At that time, the African war zone would truly be able to unleash their full strength and engage in a major battle. Ouyang Shua had summoned the three ministers to discuss personnel arrangements and also to discuss how to provide unprecedented assistance to the Protectorate of Africa and how to develop Africa. Chapter 1252. The Song, Qin, and Tang dynasties successively submitted, bringing with them a large number of people, officials, and generals for the imperial court to support the development of Africa. This was also the reason why the appointment of personnel in Africa had been delayed until now. Recently, the imperial court decided to move a total of 10 million citizens from Handan City, Xiangyang City, Xianyang City, and Chang City to the Protectorate of Africa. They would bring the most advanced farming technology from China to develop the African continent. At the same time, the imperial court also encouraged the mutants to settle down in Africa. For this, the Protectorate of Africa worked with the imperial court to formulate a series of preferential policies, such as a 1-year agricultural tax exemption, free subsidies for cattle and farming tools, etc. The goal was to set off a wave of construction in Africa in the shortest time possible. Other than economic development and agriculture, Ouyang Shua also paid great attention to the spread of the Chinese civilization. He ordered the Science, Education, and Health Bureau and the Protectorate of Africa to set up schools in Africa. The official language of the Protectorate of Africa was Chinese. Ouyang Shua hoped to use 2 to 3 years to let more than a third of the people in Africa and more than 90% of the school-age children learn and write Chinese characters. He wanted to let the Chinese civilization take root in Africa. This was not wishful thinking. In the Protectorate of Southern Border, this work had already been carried out. Perhaps it was because Southeast Asia had a close relationship with the Chinese civilization, but learning and writing Chinese characters had already become the local trend. The government-run schools all used Chinese characters and imparted the classics. While promoting the Huaxia civilization in the local area, the Huaxia civilization also absorbed the essence of the local civilization and turned it into a part of the Huaxia civilization with its inclusive and inclusive characteristic. The collision and integration of the Chinese civilization made the Chinese civilization shine even brighter. The Chinese civilization had officially stepped onto the world stage. To support the development of Africa, under Ouyang Shua's instructions, the imperial court directly allocated 30 million gold coins to the Protectorate of Africa. This was something that had never happened before. The 30 million gold coins were not directly allocated to the Protectorate of Africa, but through the Great Xia Commercial Bank and the Great Xia Agricultural Bank. With this sum of money, the two banks would be able to establish a firm foothold in Africa. The financial institutions of the 9 countries that were destroyed would also be acquired by the two banks and reorganized according to the same standards before being reopened to the outside world to reinvigorate the African financial market. This way, the two banks would be able to absorb the idle funds of the African citizens to support the second or even third stage of the opening of Africa, forming a virtuous cycle. Even 30 million gold coins would not be enough to support the vast African continent. During the development of Africa, under the supervision of the Privy Council, the African Theater of Operations also made some adjustments. Conquering the 9 nations in half a year was truly an amazing achievement. Under Baichi's personal guidance, the 4 armies of the African War Zone became a group of bloodthirsty wolves, galloping across the African continent. Baichi's reputation as the god of slaughter rose in the African continent, causing people to tremble in fear. The successive campaigns naturally had no lack of tough battles. The 4 major armies all had varying degrees of battle damage. Under the instruction of the Bureau of Military Affairs, they had directly replenished the battle damage through the use of water. After all the divisions were replenished, there were still many soldiers left. In view of this, in order to strengthen the African people's recognition of the imperial court, according to Ouyang Shua's instructions, the 4 armies of the African Theater of Operations were to disband a portion of their troops and use them to form provincial garrison divisions and government laborers. The vacancies were filled with local prisoners of war. After the adjustments were completed, the native African soldiers in the African Theater of Operations made up about 20% of the 4 armies, and the total number of soldiers was around 250,000. In the future, this would become a universal standard. In order to maintain stability, 20% of the native soldiers in the Protectorate Army had to reach the minimum standard. The advantage of doing this was to increase the recognition of the native people of the imperial court and to reduce the hostility of the neighboring African countries towards Great Xia. This was because the Great Xia army was no longer a complete outsider. The scorching sun shone into the imperial study, reminding people of the passage of time. Just a moment ago, Ouyang Shua and 3 other ministers delineated the candidates for the 2 vacant provincial governors in the African Protectorate Army. They decided to appoint Zhongsun Wuji, an old minister of the Great Tang, as the governor of Tanzania Province, and promote Yang Xiuqing, the prefectural governor of Lijiao Province, to be the governor of Tanzania Province. Zhongsun Wuji was born in the Zhongsun clan of Hunan Province and was raised by his uncle, Gao Shilian. He was an ordinary friend of Tang Taizong and later became in-laws. After Tang Gaozu Li Yuan rebelled, Zhongsun Wuji went to seek refuge and followed Li Shimin into battle. He became his trusted advisor and later participated in the Xuanwu Gate incident. During the Jingwan era, Zhongsun Wuji successively served as General of the Left Martial Marquis, Minister of Personnel, Right Servant Shi, Sikong, Situ, Palace Secretary, and was conferred the title of Duke of Zhao. He was ranked first among the meritorious officials in the Lingyan Pavilion. During the struggle for succession, he supported Emperor Gaozong and was later appointed as the appointed minister. He was conferred the title of Grand Commandant and was ranked 3 lower ranks under the Palace Secretary. During the Yonghui era, Zhongsun Wuji presided over the revision of the Tang law based on the Jingwan law. He later opposed Emperor Gaozong's appointment of Wu Zetian as the empress. During the 4th year of the Xianqing Empire, Zhongsun Wuji was framed by Su Jingzong under the instruction of Wu Zetian. He was exiled to Qianzhou and eventually hanged himself. Zhongsun Wuji served in 3 dynasties and was the prime minister for more than 30 years. He was talented in both civil and military affairs and was a famous politician in the early Tang dynasty. As a relative of the nobility, he held power but was not absolute. He was loyal to the Tang imperial family and did his best to contribute to the formulation of the Tang dynasty's laws and regulations. Ouyang Shua did not feel at ease to leave such a talented civil and military person in the country, and thus he cruelly banished him to the African continent. His future depended on Zhongsun Wuji's performance. Zhongsun Wuji was banished, but the other governor, Yang Xiuqing, was given an important position. From a prefectural governor to a provincial governor, no matter which province, it seemed like a small step, but it was like a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. Moreover, the Mazong province occupied a large area and was bordered by the Banto dynasty. It was strategically important and rich in resources. Moreover, it coincided with the development of Africa. As the governor of Mazong, Yang Xiuqing had a bright future. Yang Xiuqing was also considered an old minister of the imperial family. He had submitted when the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was pacified. The reason why Ouyang Shuo promoted Yang Xiuqing to the position of Governor Mo's was not only because of their old friendship, but also because Yang Xiuqing had the ability to do so, especially after she had washed away the traces of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. She was truly a peerless talent. The governor of Tanzania Province and Mazong Province were easy to choose. The difficult part was the governor of Guangxi. Guangxi Province included the Qin and Tang kingdoms. Not only did it have the two main cities of Azura City and Luoya City, it also had the two royal cities of Xianying and Chang'an. After being managed by the Qin and Tang kingdoms, its foundation was strong and not something other provinces could compare to. The governor of Guangxi was not a great talent. Logically, the old ministers of Great Qin, Li Si and Wei Liao, and the old ministers of Great Tang, Fang Xianling and Gao Shilian, were all first-rate talents. Unfortunately, they were too deeply involved with Guangxi province. Regardless of whether it was to avoid suspicion or other reasons, it was impossible for them to be the governor of Guangxi, no matter how he thought about it. It was most suitable to transfer one of the current governors. Using this opportunity, Ouyang Shuo made an inventory of the governors who had been in office for a long time. They included the governor of Liao and Jin, Huaguang, the governor of Yunnan, Peizhu, the governor of Lingnan, Wei Ran, the governor of Jiangchuan, Fan Zhongyan, the governor of Jingchu, and Lord Shimen, the governor of the Eastern Sea. The rest were all appointed in the past 1 or 2 years. From this, it could be seen how fast the Great Xia was expanding. There was a frequent turnover of personnel and a constant flow of new people joining. Among the 6 governors, Lao Ai was the future protector general of the western borders and was not suitable to be transferred. Fan Zhongyan and Lord Shimen had just been adjusted and were not suitable either. Even Peizhu had just been transferred from Somalia's governor to Yunnan's governor in the 7th year of Gaia. As such, it seemed that only Huaguang and Wei Ran were left to choose. The Mongolian Empire had not been pacified, and the imperial court still needed Huaguang, a civil and military official, to oversee the Liao and Jin provinces. It was not suitable to transfer him. In the end, it seemed that only Wei Ran was left to choose. Unfortunately, Ouyang Shuo was most dissatisfied with Wei Ran. Wei Ran had a history of corruption and abuse of power. Although he had restrained himself under Ouyang Shuo's warning, it was impossible for him to completely reverse the situation and prevent Ouyang Shuo from placing him in an important position. This time, it was a dead end. Zhang Tingyu said, "Your Majesty, why don't we appoint Wei Ran as the governor of Guangxi?" It was a taboo to leave important personnel matters undecided. In Zhang Tingyu's opinion, it was not bad to compromise sometimes. Ouyang Shuo was silent for a long time with his brows tightly knitted. After a long time, he said, "There are some things that cannot be compromised. How about this? Let's transfer Peizhu to the governor of Guangxi." Ouyang Shuo trusted Peizhu very much. Ko Zhuan and Zhang Tingyu, the 2 ministers, looked at each other thoughtfully. Wei Ran's misdeeds had caused him to lose the opportunity to be promoted. It was truly regrettable. His Majesty's persistence in using people and his strong principles could be seen. It was likely that from now on, Wei Ran would not be able to be placed in an important position and would be stuck there for the rest of his life. A strange light flashed in Jiang Shang's eyes. His thoughts were somewhat different from Ko Zhuan and Zhang Tingyu. Was the reason why His Majesty stopped Wei Ran from being promoted? Was it because Wei Ran's son-in-law, Bai Qi, was too bright? Jiang Shang did not dare to think about it, and could only remain silent. The schemes of an emperor are unfathomable. Sometimes, Jiang Shang could not understand His Majesty's thoughts. Peizhu was transferred to the governor of Guangxi, and the vacant governor of Yunnan was proposed by Ko Zhuan to be taken by Gao Shilian, an old minister of Tang. As a result, Tang had 2 governors. It was indeed full of talents. Gao Shilian used to be the Minister of Rights of the Sui dynasty. Because he was implicated by Hu Siqing, In the 9th year of Day, he was demoted to the position of Registrar of Zhuyan County and appointed by Governor Qiu, he of Jiaoji, as the Assistant Secretary of Justice. In the 5th year of Wuda, Gao Shilian submitted to the Tang dynasty and was placed in charge of the administration of Yongzhou. Later, he assisted Li Shimin in initiating the Xuanwu Gate Rebellion and was promoted to the position of Assistant Secretary of Yixing Prefecture. In the 5th year of Jingguan, he was appointed as the Minister of Personnel and was conferred the title of Duke of Su. He was ordered to compile the clan records and was conferred the title of lower 3 ranks of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. In the 12th year, he was conferred the title of Duke of Shun and was conferred the title of Governor of Shin Province. In the 19th year, he was conferred the title of Grand Tutor and assisted Crown Prince Li Ji in governing the country. In the 21st year, he died in office and was conferred the title of Governor of Situ and Bingzhou. He was buried with Emperor Taizong in Zhao Mausoleum. From this, it could be seen that Gao Shilian was completely qualified to be the governor of Yunnan. After discussing the candidates for the governor of Guangxi, it was time to make arrangements for the 3 civil officials, Li Si, Wei Liao, and Fang Xianling. This was another troublesome task. Putting Wei Liao aside, his fame was not too prominent, but Li Si and Fang Xianling were outstanding. Even in the 5,000 years of history of China, they were considered top talents and were ranked among the top 10 ministers of China. The problem was that there was no position for them in Great Xia. Chapter 1253. Given Li Si's and Fang Xuanling's capabilities, they would at least be bureau chiefs. Even if they were to become one of the 4 ministers, they would still be qualified to join the cabinet. However, these positions could not be adjusted at the moment. Ouyang Shuo did not even intend to add new ministers to the cabinet. There was already a prime minister, 3 vice ministers, and 2 part-time vice ministers. Any more, and it would be too much. However, he had to make arrangements. He couldn't let such talents be idle. That would be a waste of resources. Just as Ouyang Shuo was in a dilemma, Jiang Shang stood up and said, "Your Majesty, I think that it's time to equip the 3 protectorates with the chief historian and secretary general." The chief historian was equivalent to the chief of staff of the protectorate, similar to the secretary general in modern society. The secretary general was equivalent to the chief of staff and could be seen as the military advisor of the protectorate. The chief historian was equivalent to the chief of staff of the protectorate, similar to the secretary general in modern society. The secretary general was equivalent to the chief of staff and could be seen as the military advisor of the protectorate. Given that Great Xia still separated the military and politics, the chief historian's position was much higher than the secretary general's. According to Great Xia's system, the protectorate was divided into 2 levels, the protectorate general and the protectorate general. This was because in the military, the protectorate general was ranked above the great general. Hence, the protectorate general was ranked above the protectorate general, which was different from the Tang dynasty system. The protectorate general was ranked 2, on the same level as the chamberlain of dependencies, the imperial censor, and the chief secretary. It was higher than the 4 great academies' deputy chancellors, but lower than the 4 great academies' chancellors. Correspondingly, the chief historian of the protectorate general was rank 3, on the same level as the governor of a province. The protectorate general was rank 2, on the same level as the 4 great academies' deputy chancellors and Jingjiaoi. The chief historian of the protectorate general was rank 3, on the same level as the 4 great academies' deputy chancellors and Jingjiaoi. The chief historian of the protectorate general was rank 3, on the same level as the secretary general of the 4 great academies. At the same time, the president of the Great Xia Bank, as the central bank, was promoted from rank 3 to rank 2. The 2 presidents of the Great Xia Commercial Bank and the Great Xia Agricultural Bank continued to be rank 3. The Southern Border Protectorate Manor had 5 provinces under it, so it was naturally an Upper Protectorate Manor. Thus, the full name should be the Southern Border Protectorate Manor. The Protectorate General of the Protectorate General of the three provinces was the Protectorate General of the Protectorate of the Southern Border. The Protectorate General of the Protectorate General of the Southern Protectorate General of the Protectorate General of Protectorate General. At this time, Jiang Shang proposed that the three protectorates be equipped with chief historian and scribes. Firstly, it was to strengthen the protectorates and assist the protector generals. Secondly, he was implying that the protector generals should be given corresponding restrictions and supervision. Shan, Ouyang's Yang Jiang said. Jiang of. Yang of Yang Jiang smiled. You're emperor of Yang of. Coincidentally, Li Si, Fang Xianling, and Wei Liao had all started out as strategists. They were skilled in both the pen and the sword, and some of them had even served as chief annals. After the discussion, it was decided that Li Si would be appointed as the chief historian of the Southern Border Protectorate, Fang Xianling as the chief historian of the Southern Border Protectorate, and Wei Liao as the chief historian of the Northern Border Protectorate. Comparatively speaking, the situation in Africa was the most complicated. Li Si should be the most suitable candidate to be the chief official of the African Protectorate. However, Ouyang Shua considered two things. Firstly, Mulan Lanyue was still young and might not be able to control Li Si. Secondly, Li Si, who was also a subject of Qin, could not go to Africa to take up a post. Fortunately, Fang Xianling was also resourceful and honest. He had the demeanor of an elder, so it was likely that he would become Mulan Yu's right-hand man, assisting her as she became a high-ranking official guarding the borders of the imperial court. At this point, this round of personnel adjustments had come to an end. Before leaving, Ko Zhuan asked, Your Majesty, will the Guangxi province be located? Regardless of whether it was Chang, En, or Xianyang, they were more than enough to serve as the administrative center of a province. That was why it was so difficult. No matter which city they chose, the citizens of the other city would be dissatisfied. Ouyang Shua, on the other hand, took it lightly. He smiled and said, First come, first served. Let's settle on Xianyang then. Yes, Your Majesty. Ko Zhuan gasped in admiration. If that was the case, Chang would have nothing to say. After sending off Jiang Shang and the other two, Ouyang Shua wasn't done with his work. Settling a group of civil officials and adjusting the relevant personnel was only the first step in dealing with the aftermath of this battle. Following that, he had to figure out how to settle a group of generals, as well as the four armies of Zhou, Song, Qin, and Tang. Among the generals who surrendered, Qin had Wang Jian and Wang Bin, while Tang had Li Ji, Hou Junji, Yuqi Jingde, and Cheng Yaojin. Among them, Wang Jian and Li Ji, who were considered to be on par with Li Jing, were the strongest and were qualified to be the commanders of the army corps. Wang Bin and Hou Junji were the next strongest, followed by Yuqi Jingde and Cheng Yaojin. Given Wang Jian's talent, he was even qualified to be the commander of a theater of operations. Then, there were the surrendered armies of the four nations. Among them, there were 650,000 soldiers from Zhou, 380,000 from Song, and 500,000 from Qin and Tang respectively. There was a total of 2.03 million soldiers. Apart from the slightly inferior Song army, the rest could be considered elites. It would be a pity if they were all dismissed. The problem was that following the unification of the Central Plains, the existing Great Xia army had to undergo a series of retrenchments to reduce expenses and replenish the treasury, let alone establish a new army corps or army corps. How to deal with these 2 million soldiers became a big problem. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Zhang Liang, Jia Su, and Du Ruhe were invited to the imperial study for discussion. Everyone, how do you think we should arrange the armies of the four nations? Ouyang Shua asked. Seeing this, Zhang Liang was still the first to step forward and replied, Your Majesty, I think that the arrangement of the armies of the four nations shouldn't be an isolated matter. It should be considered together with the upcoming major disarmament. What do you mean? Zhang Liang said. Following the unification of the Central Plains, the empire's strategy has shifted from internal to external. This major disarmament shouldn't be as simple and crude as the previous few times. Instead, It should be based on the empire's strategic direction and determined by war. The current structure of the army should be thoroughly reorganized. The fundamental goal is to increase the combat power of the entire army, not to weaken it. Ever since Qin and Tang submitted, the officials had a tacit understanding to replace the word imperial with empire. Yes, with the current territory of Great Xia, even though it wasn't an imperial dynasty, it was definitely worthy of the name empire. Calling it an imperial dynasty in the old days made it seem a little petty. Ouyang Shua tacitly agreed to this. No matter what, an empire sounded more imposing than an imperial dynasty. This was also the confidence that a rising powerful nation should have. What Zhang Liang said was no longer a problem with the 2 million soldiers, and it wasn't even a problem with the Great Xia army. It directly escalated to the empire's strategic issue for the next 2 to 3 years, or even longer. The problem was huge, but it couldn't be avoided. Ouyang Shua smiled. Zhang Liang was indeed a master of strategy, and Ouyang Shua was very willing to follow his advice. All right, then everyone, let's discuss how the empire's future strategic direction should be determined. Zhang Liang stood up again. The prerequisite for becoming an imperial dynasty is to obtain the position of the overlord of Asia. If we start from this point, India in the southwest, the Persian Empire in the west, and the Romanov dynasty in the north are all great enemies that we can't avoid. They should be the empire's strategic focus. Zhang Liang didn't mention Java in the southeast and the Mongolian Empire in the north. It wasn't that he was negligent, but with the empire's current strength, these two countries were nothing more than minor ailments and couldn't be treated as major opponents. Further away, the African continent, which has already achieved success, and the American continent, which is still in its infancy, are the empire's strategic focus. As for whether to intervene in the European continent, it's all up to Her Majesty, Zhang Liang said. Unknowingly, Great Xia already had the framework of a global hegemon, and its tentacles were almost all over the world. However, this framework was still very fragile, and it needed to continuously strengthen its foundation. Ouyang Shua stated, the European continent isn't included in the strategic considerations for now. In Europe, Great Xia currently only had one base city. It was undoubtedly a fantasy to think that it could move the entire European continent with the power of a single city. More importantly, in Ouyang Shua's long-term plan, Europe shouldn't be Great Xia's mortal enemy. In the future, there might be a possibility of forming an alliance. Understood. Zhang Liang nodded. He also felt that giving up on Europe was a wise choice. They couldn't expand their territory too much. At this moment, Du Ruhui stood up and said, this humble subject thinks that although it's important to expand outwards, we can't give up on domestic defense. No matter what changes, the Central Plains should be the empire's core, and we can't slack off. Ouyang Shua nodded and concluded, the Central Plains, South Asia, West Asia, North Asia, Africa, and the American continent. These 6 strategic directions can't be ignored, and there are strong opponents in each of them. From this, it can be seen that the empire is still facing a huge challenge. Just as Zi Fong said, we should properly plan for this major disarmament. How to reduce the absolute number of soldiers while ensuring and even increasing the overall combat power of the entire army is the most important thing. After this, the Grand Council, the Privy Council, and the Cabinet of Advisors should plan carefully and come up with a feasible disarmament plan as soon as possible. We should strive to complete this disarmament before the end of the year, Ouyang Shua ordered. Yes, the 3 ministers accepted the order in unison. It was already mid-July, and there were only 5 months left until the end of the year. According to common sense, this round of disarmament involved the entire army, and it would take at least 3 months or even longer. This also meant that there wasn't much time left for the 3 major institutions to come up with a disarmament plan. Before that, they still had to settle the problem of the 2 million soldiers. Regarding this matter, Jia Su had a plan that he wanted to report to Her Majesty. However, this plan was very vicious, and it might not be approved. Chapter 1254. Your Majesty, this humble subject thinks that before the general disarmament, we should first deal with the Tubo and Java countries, so as to not leave behind any future troubles and reduce the army with peace of mind. Jiasu said, "This subject agrees." Du Ruhui nodded in agreement and said, "Now that the war in Africa has stopped, the Central Plains has been unified, and there is no movement in America for the time being, it is the best time to divert our energy to completely solve the two countries." Zhang Liang also joined in and remonstrated. The Indian Ayodhya dynasty is one of the biggest obstacles to the empire's domination of Asia. This time, they even brazenly annexed the Tufan dynasty, damaging the prestige of Huaxia. At this time, the empire must not compromise. We must strike back with an iron fist and chase the Ashoka dynasty out of Chinese territory to defend the glory of China. Ouyang Shuo was silent, but he still looked at Jiasu. "Does my beloved subject have a good plan?" "Exactly." Jiasu suppressed the anxiety in his heart and revealed everything about the meat grinder plan he named. After Jiasu finished speaking, the air in the entire imperial study turned cold, directly dropping by more than 10 degrees. Ouyang Shuo's brows were tightly knitted together. He got up and paced back and forth in the room. Zhang Liang and Du Ruhui, on the other hand, were staring at Jiasu with reverence and bewilderment. No one had expected Jiasu to be so crazy. The Ashoka dynasty was strong because of its 5 million imperial soldiers. Jiasu's meat grinder plan was a tit-for-tat proposal. He proposed to send all of the 4 million troops to the Tubo battlefield under the unified command of the Northwest Theater of Operations to start a shocking war of attrition, turning the entire Tubo dynasty into a huge meat grinder. In this way, not only will the imperial army of the Ashoka dynasty be depleted, but the problem of the 2 million soldiers will also be solved. It can be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Only the survivors of the battlefield are qualified to be incorporated into the Great Xia army. Jiasu said. Ouyang Shuo sat back down and looked at Du Ruhui. "Kemming, what do you think? The road from Shu to Tubo is difficult and requires crossing mountains and ridges. Transporting the army to the front lines is already an extremely difficult task, not to mention providing the rations and resources used by the 2 million-strong army. It is as difficult as ascending to the heavens." Du Ruhui was implicitly disagreeing with the plan. Indeed, if they wanted to provide the consumption of 2 million soldiers, the Shu province alone would not be able to support it. Transporting goods from Sichuan to Tubo is one difficulty, and transporting goods from other provinces to Sichuan is another difficulty. Even if the grain was transported from the nearby Jingshu province to Tubo, the consumption of the road would be very astonishing. "The loss outweighs the gain," Du Ruhui said. Jiasu, however, had a different view. "It's difficult for us, but it's also difficult for the Ashoka dynasty. At times like this, it's a contest of willpower and determination. Whoever is more ruthless will win." Du Ruhui still didn't agree. She changed the subject and said, "Can we send troops from Hetao province? With the support of the Southern Border Protectorate, the logistics of sending troops from Hetao will be much smoother." Jiasu shook his head. "Sending troops from Hetao can only attack the Peacock Imperial Court. There's nothing wrong with that." The two of them were at loggerheads. Ouyang Shuo didn't say a word the entire time, allowing the two of them to argue. Jiaqi said, "The Ashoka dynasty has always been the greatest threat to the empire. If they attacked the Peacock Imperial Court, even if they won, they would still have to face the threat of the Ashoka Imperial Court at its peak, and perhaps the Gudar Imperial Court would also participate. If anything goes wrong and we fail to defend it, we will be working for the Ashoka dynasty. Moreover, attacking the Peacock Imperial Court will not solve the Tubo problem. If you want to hit a snake, you have to hit it where it hurts. Since the Ashoka dynasty is the greatest threat, you have to destroy it at all costs." Du Ruhui retorted, "We have spent a lot of money to fight a war of attrition with the Ashoka Imperial Court, but aren't we also working for the Peacock Imperial Court and the Gudar Imperial Court?" Jiasu smiled. At present, the situation of the Tianju district is one strong and two weak. After the Ashoka imperial court showed great aggression, the Peacock King and the Guder King must be restless. If the Ashoka imperial court falls into the war with Tubo, in my opinion, not only will the Peacock imperial court and the Guder imperial court not help, they will also take advantage of the situation and encircle and annihilate the Ashoka imperial court in Tianju. Therefore, no matter which side wins in the end, it will weaken the overall strength of the Tianju district and lay a solid foundation for the empire to attack Tianju in the future. Du Ruhui was speechless. He didn't expect Jia Su to be so thorough. It was obvious that the meat grinder plan was not Jia Su's impromptu idea, but a mature plan that took a long time to come up with. All aspects had been considered. The strange thing was that in the debate, the two did not mention whether it was appropriate and fair to send 2 million troops to the front line. It was obvious that the two had reached a tacit understanding on this point and did not point it out. Jia Su added, and the transportation of provisions and supplies is not really as difficult as it looks. In addition to the transportation from the Shu province, the Xihai province, Yunnan province, and the Hutao province of the southern frontier are all bordering Tubo. They can advance from all four routes and continuously transport supplies to Tubo. In this regard, we actually have an advantage over the Ashoka imperial court. Moreover, the first season of grain has been harvested. It is a rare harvest season and can support this war of attrition. The heavens bless the empire. It must be decided in one battle. Jia Su concluded. Du Ruhui had nothing more to say. He turned to Ouyang Shua and saluted. Your Majesty, I have no objections. Ouyang Shua silently nodded and then looked at Zhang Liang. The latter stood up and also saluted, saying, Your Majesty, the future depends on this one action. There are some risks that must be taken. Since that is the case, then let it be done. At this moment, Ouyang Shua's tone was devoid of emotion, his rationality chilling. These words would affect the fate of more than 2 million troops, the distribution of labor in the surrounding provinces, and the supply of provisions for the empire for half a year. It was as heavy as 1,000 caddies, but Ouyang Shua had learned to handle it with care. Yes, Zhang Liang, Du Ruhui, and Jia Su bowed in unison and took their leave. In late July, unbeknownst to the Ashoka imperial court, the Great Xia launched the largest and most widespread logistical battle since its founding. Under the unified deployment of the Bureau of Military Affairs, with the cooperation of the Protectorate of Southern Border and the various provincial government offices, tens of millions of provisions flowed like a tide to the four provinces of Xihai, Shu, Yunnan, and Hutao. According to the unified requirements of the imperial court, the Guangxi province and Hedong province were connected to the Xihai province, which was also the northernmost route. The Jiangsu province and Xiangnan province were connected to the Shu province. The North Sichuan province and South Sichuan province were connected to the Yunnan province. The Hanoi province was connected to the Hutao province, which was also the southernmost route. In other words, in order to prepare for the Tubo War, the Great Xia mobilized the resources of 11 provinces. This was not only unique in the Great Xia, but also in the entire world. For this war, the Great Xia was really going all out. Chapter 1255. P.S. Update. On the 25th day of the 7th lunar month, Great Xia announced the appointment and dismissal of generals. The commander of the Northwest Battlefield, General Li Jing, stepped down from his concurrent position as the commander of the Flying Bear Army and was replaced by the commander of the East River Army, Zongtong. Ho Junji, the surrendered general of the Great Tang, took over as the commander of the Hedong Army. The Battle of Tubo that was about to begin was under the unified command of the Northwest Theater of Operations. In order to reduce Li Jing's burden and make him devote himself to the battle, the imperial court removed Li Jing's position as the commander of the Flying Bear Army at the right time. It was the general trend that the commander of the theater of operations would no longer be the commander of the army. Zhuo Zongtong was familiar with the western frontier, and he was a first-rate general himself. Moreover, he was good at using firearms. All of these made him stand out in the competition for the position of commander of the Flying Bear Army. There was an unwritten rule in the Great Xia Army. Under normal circumstances, if there was a vacancy in the field army, the person would be promoted from the commander of the border guards. Unless the new general had extraordinary talent and was irreplaceable, he could only assume the post of commander of the Border Defense Army. Just like Ho Junji, who had taken over the post of commander of the East River Army. Ho Junji was a famous general of the Tang dynasty. He was the minister of war. In his early days, he was ignorant and incompetent, but he claimed to be brave and courageous. Later, he joined Prince Qin's mansion and fought alongside Li Shimin. Gradually, he was recognized by Li Shimin, and together with Yu Qigong, he persuaded Li Shimin to start the Black Tortoise Gate incident. After the Tang Empire was unified, Ho Junji's official position became higher and higher. He began to learn and participate in the selection of talents. He had once learned the art of war from Li Jing, but he falsely accused Li Jing of having the intention to rebel. During the Jingguan era, he followed Li Jing to suppress the Turks and then led the army to destroy the Gaochang kingdom. Ho Junji, who had performed outstanding meritorious service, began to become arrogant. He was imprisoned for stealing treasures during the conquest of Gaochang. After his release, he began to feel resentment and hatred. He persuaded General Zhang Liang and Crown Prince Li Chengqian to rebel. In the 17th year of Jingguan, Ho Junji was implicated in the Crown Prince Li Chengqian's rebellion and was executed. From this, it can be seen that Ho Junji has the ability to lead troops in a battle. It's just that his character is lacking and his personal morality is lacking. He can't be considered a military officer with both ability and integrity. Ouyang Shaw only hoped that Ho Junji would restrain himself a little with the lesson of history. It wasn't until mid-August that the Ashoka dynasty finally noticed the abnormality in Great Xia. As an NPC dynasty, the annexation of Tubo was the first time the Asoka dynasty had set foot on a formed battlefield. It was also at that time that the Asoka dynasty made use of the Tubo citizens to establish an intelligence agency in China and began to infiltrate Great Xia. One could imagine how immature such an intelligence agency was. Especially under the encirclement of the mountain sea guards, it was basically difficult to move a single step in Huaxia. The secret agents of the Ashoka dynasty had only managed to find out about such a large-scale transportation of rations in Great Xia after nearly a month. It was a complete failure. At this point in time, the first batch of Great Xia's rations was already in place. This also meant that Great Xia already had the conditions to start a war. Subsequent rations and supplies could be transported continuously during the war. Indian District, Ashoka Dynasty, Delhi City. Ashoka was the third-generation king of the Peacock dynasty of the ancient Indian kingdom of Magadha. His reign was an unprecedentedly powerful era in the history of ancient India, and he was also the greatest king in the history of India. If an inaccurate comparison had to be made, Ashoka's status in India was basically similar to Huaxia's Emperor Hanwu. At the age of 18, Ashoka was appointed as the governor of Abhini province. Around 273 BC, Bintu Sala was seriously ill, and the court did not appoint a crown prince. In order to seize the throne, Ashoka joined the fight for the throne with the help of his minister, Qinghu. Legend had it that Ashoka had murdered 99 of his siblings. In the end, Ashoka was victorious, and around 269 BC, he held an official ascension ceremony. In his early years, Ashoka was warlike and massacred. He unified the entire South Asian subcontinent and part of present-day Afghanistan. In his later years, he was a devout believer in Buddhism and put down the butcher's knife. He was also known as Ashoka King. Ashoka, who appeared in the wilderness, was just over 40 years old. He was warlike and bloodthirsty in his prime and wise in his later years. He was truly an emperor that could not be underestimated. It was no wonder that Indian geniuses like the Peacock King and the Mando King had to be courteous to him. Naturally, there was no such thing as retreating without a fight in Ashoka's dictionary. Therefore, when he heard that Great Xia was actively preparing for war, Ashoka did not hesitate and immediately issued a war mobilization order to defend the Tufan dynasty that he had just conquered. One had to know that the moment he conquered Tufan and set foot on the land of Huaxia, Ashoka's prestige in India rose to a new height. Even the Peacock dynasty and the Gudo dynasty, which had always been active, temporarily fell silent. This was because this was something that the two dynasties had wanted to do but failed to do. Based on this alone, Ashoka had to defend this hard-won glory at all costs. Otherwise, what was the meaning of his rebirth in the wilderness? Following Ashoka's order, another 500,000 imperial soldiers gathered at the border of Tufan. Including the millions of imperial soldiers that were already stationed in Tufan and the 300,000 Tufan soldiers that had been swallowed and transformed, Ashoka had a total of 1.8 million soldiers, which was extraordinary courage. With this army, Ashoka was even confident that he could turn from defense to offense and attack the Shu province of Great Xia. After all, according to the intelligence from the frontline spies, Great Xia was currently only transporting rations and supplies to the front line, and there were no signs of the mobilization of the army. Even the news of the transportation of rations was limited to the Shu province. The intelligence ability of the two was really not on the same level. Compared to the slow intelligence of the Ashoka dynasty, the active black snake guards in the Tianzhu district were more powerful. As soon as Ashoka issued the war mobilization order, the relevant intelligence was immediately obtained and reported to the imperial court. August 18th, Jingshi, the scholar of the Pavilion of Secret Texts, was peerless in his generation. He wore a black tight suit and appeared calm and capable. He deliberately concealed his peerless appearance. He took the intelligence report that the Black Snake Guards had just presented and brought it to the table in the imperial study. She had just entered the secret literature pavilion and was in charge of the confidential intelligence, so she naturally kept a low profile. She knew that although the decoration of the Xia Palace was similar to the Great Zhou Palace, the two were completely different. This palace was not only the center of Great Xia, but also the center of the world. Her every move was watched by all parties. His Majesty would not trust her as much as Di Chun. What she could do was to speak less and do more. She did not dare to say anything out of line, and she did not dare to dress gorgeously, so as not to fall into the name of seducing His Majesty. Time reveals a person's heart. Ouyang Shuan naturally had no time to care about the thoughts of peerless elegance and took the intelligence report. Because the preparation for the Tubo War was a waste of manpower and money, Ouyang Shua faced a lot of pressure in the imperial court. Although no one dared to stand out to oppose, once this war was defeated, Ouyang Shua's prestige in the imperial court would definitely be affected. According to the historical plot, Jia Su, the instigator of this, would lose his position and become a scapegoat. Therefore, this war could only be won and not lost. After reading the intelligence report, Ouyang Shua smiled in relief. He was worried that Ashoka would not dare to press forward. If that was the case, only 1 million soldiers of the Ashoka dynasty would be wasted, and it would be far from the goal of weakening the Ashoka dynasty. Ashoka did not disappoint Ouyang Shua. Send this intelligence report to the Grand Council, the Bureau of Military Affairs, the Northwest War Zone, and the Southwest War Zone. Tell them that we can move. Ouyang Shua put down the intelligence report and ordered. Yes. Peerless elegance nodded in agreement. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. Compared to Di Chun, who was always anxious and impatient, this man in front of him seemed to be able to handle things as if they were light. This kind of demeanor could not be learned. Chapter 1256. P.S. Add another update. On the 19th of August, the Great Xia army began to move according to plan. From 9 in the morning, the 650,000 Zhou soldiers stationed in the barracks outside the city were teleported from Handan City to Baidu City in the Hetao province in batches. They were prepared to attack Tubo from Hetao province as the left wing of the army. The person commanding this army was the former commander of the Danyang army, Tian Dan. At the same time, the 380,000 Song soldiers were teleported from Xiangyang City to Dali City in batches. They planned to attack Tubo from Yunnan province as the center of the army. Due to the fact that the Great Song had no good generals, the imperial court specially appointed the commander of the Northern Frontier Army, Yu Fei, to temporarily command this Song army. Since the Northern Frontier Army still had a deputy commander, Chun Yuqing, Yu Fei would be fine if he left temporarily. Under the command of the famous General Li Ji, 500,000 Tang soldiers were teleported from Chang and city to Chengdu in batches. They would attack Tubo from Shu province as the main force of the army. Similarly, under the command of Divine General Wang Jian, 500,000 Qin soldiers set off from Xianyang City and headed west into Shihai province before attacking Tubo. They would be the right wing of the army. The two field armies commanded by Li Jing were the reserve forces of the army. In order to make the 2 million soldiers willingly rush to the front line, Ouyang Shua said that whether the soldiers could be incorporated into the Great Xia army in the future and whether the generals could be placed in important positions would depend on their performance in the battle. The families of those who died in the battle would receive the standard pension of the Great Xia army. Ouyang Shua even personally went to the various barracks and said frankly, "The 4 countries have surrendered. It is the will of the people and the general trend. It is not your fault. All of you might be unconvinced or indignant and wish that you could avenge yourself on the battlefield. In that case, the battle with Tubo is your chance to prove yourself. Whether you're a dragon or a worm, it all depends on this battle." The moment he said that, all the soldiers were moved. In the past month, there had been rumors about how the imperial court would settle the surrendered troops. The most popular one was that the imperial court wanted to disband them. The soldiers were naturally unconvinced, especially the surrendered troops of the Qin and Tang kingdoms. They thought that they were not inferior to the Great Xia army, but they did not have the chance to fight on the battlefield. To be honest, the soldiers were not without resentment. Now, the imperial court had given them a chance to prove themselves. This time, it's not a civil war in China, but a war against a foreign army. I hope that you can bravely kill your enemies on the battlefield and spread the might of China. This is also to fight for your country's last bit of glory. Ouyang Shua said. This time, there were soldiers whose eyes were moist. It was the duty of the army to defend their territory. As the last barrier of the dynasty, they were ashamed that they could not do this. It was reported that when the news of Qin Shi Huang's death reached the army, the 500,000 Qin soldiers ran away in tears, their cries shaking the heavens. Such a scene was enough to move anyone. Therefore, when they got the news that the imperial court had ordered them to go on an expedition to Tufan, the 500,000 Qin soldiers did not hesitate at all. Their morale was high, and they were determined to defend the glory of Great Qin's army in the Tufan battlefield. A large portion of the soldiers were even prepared to face death with equanimity. Ouyang Shua remembered clearly that a veteran soldier of the Qin army had said this. Not being able to accompany His Majesty, the King of Qin, to die is the greatest regret of our lives. Now, we can only scatter our broken bodies on the battlefield so that we can live up to the name of the Qin army. Great Qin was like a tiger and a wolf. Even though it had not been long since they appeared in the wilderness, they still had unyielding pride and unyielding bones. Magnificent, Great Qin! Ouyang Shua personally raised his cup and sent off the soldiers of Great Qin. He sighed and said, "We do not want all of you to die on the battlefield. We only hope that all of you can continue to pass down the strength of Great Qin and integrate it into the bloodline of Great Xia. Don't forget that we are one and have a common home. Its name is China. Cheers!" Ouyang Shua drained the cup in one gulp and smashed it on the ground. "Cheers, Your Majesty." The soldiers of Great Qin had tears in their eyes as they drained the cup in one gulp and smashed it on the ground. Even Wang Jian and Wang Bin, who were present at the scene, were moved. This, Your Majesty, was both Qin Shi Huang and Ouyang Shua. Ouyang Shua used his extraordinary charisma to conquer this group of iron-blooded men in an instant, making them willingly rush to the battlefield. The scene that day was too shocking, and Ouyang Shuo would never be able to forget it for the rest of his life. The majestic China, 5,000 years of glory, such bones of steel, such unyielding blood, had always been flowing in the blood of every Chinese. As long as the country was in trouble, they would burst forth with power that could make their enemies tremble in fear. As a Chinese, Ouyang Shuo was proud of his entire life. There were more than 2 million soldiers from 4 countries, and there were good and bad mixed together. There were soldiers who sang sorrowful songs, but naturally, there was no lack of cowards who were afraid of war, and even those who held grudges against Great Xia. The imperial court had made 2 preparations for such a group of people. Firstly, it was the Flying Bear Army and Soaring Eagle Army from the Northwest War Zone. On the surface, they were the reserve troops, but in reality, they were the enforcement team and supervision team of the army. Those who refused to fight to the death would be executed without mercy. Secondly, it was their families. 2 million soldiers were going to war, but their families were still in the Central Plains. If they dared to act recklessly or disobey orders, they couldn't blame the imperial court for implicating their families. With such a bargaining chip, there was no need to worry that the soldiers wouldn't fight. Taking 10,000 steps back, after surrendering to Great Xia, they were already considered soldiers of Great Xia. Since they were soldiers, it was only right and proper for them to go to war for the country, so there shouldn't be any complaints. The war with Tubo was an upright war, and it wasn't as if they were purely throwing their lives away. The imperial court had already stated that this war would be the same as other wars. Killing enemies on the battlefield would be considered as merits, and they would be rewarded accordingly. The only difference was that this war was probably crueler. However, cruelty was the norm on the battlefield, and they should have a clear understanding of this on the day they joined the army. Therefore, in essence, the soldiers really had nothing to complain about. The imperial court had done so much work in the hope that the 2 million soldiers who were going to war would fight this war with the vigor they should have and lay the foundation for the empire's domination of the Asian continent. It wasn't that they hoped that the soldiers who were going to war would be a group of weaklings with low morale. If that was the case, they wouldn't be wasting the Ashoka dynasty's energy, but would be giving experience to the enemy. For this war, the imperial court could be considered to have suffered a great loss. Not to mention the teleportation fee of nearly 2 million gold coins. It was considered a small amount compared to other expenses. The biggest expense was the transportation of such a large amount of rations and supplies. Moreover, the cost of sending the rations to a dangerous place like Tubo was extremely high. Then there was the predictable, astronomical compensation for those who died in the war. From the attitude of the Ashoka dynasty, one could vaguely foresee the intensity of the war with Tubo, and the number of people who died in the war was definitely not small. If there was no war, the imperial court would only need to pay them a sum of retirement money. Moreover, after they retired, they could still contribute to the construction of the empire. With this in and out of the accounts were getting a little messy. Chapter 12:57. The Qinghai Tibet Plateau was densely covered with mountains and rivers. The terrain was steep and changeable, and the topography was complex and undulating. There was the world's highest peak, Mount Everest, as well as the Jinsha River, which was only 1,503 meters above sea level. There were majestic and precipitous mountains, as well as endless river valleys and plains. The rolling river flowed through the mountains, twisting and turning. The river valleys were covered with green grass, and tall and mighty yaks with long hair could be seen everywhere. The lake was sparkling like the blue sky, so clear that the bottom could be seen. The top of the mountain was covered with pure white snow, but the foot of the mountain was as warm as spring. In the middle of the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, on the north side of the Himalayas, was the Tubo Kingdom's capital, Luoxia City. The Luoxia River flowed through the city and into the famous Yarlung Zongbor River in the southern suburbs. Before the capital was moved, Luoxia City was a swamp and barren. After Sonsan Gampo moved the capital, He built a palace, repaired the river, and built temples. This laid the prototype of Laotia City. The Jiaqing Temple was built during this period. Although Laotia City was overcast in August, it was still considered calm. On the 25th, the four armies of Great Xia arrived at the border of Tubo. The first obstacle in front of them was not the army of the Ashoka dynasty, but the harsh climate of the plateau. The four armies had never fought in the highlands before. When they suddenly set foot on the land of Tubo, they more or less suffered from altitude sickness, headaches, insomnia, loss of appetite, fatigue, breathing difficulties. Every one of them was a killer on the battlefield that couldn't be ignored. Fortunately, the physical fitness of the soldiers was excellent, their morale was high, and the altitude sickness wasn't severe. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to fight this war. Every army that set foot on the Tubo border had to rest and reorganize for 2 days. They could only truly embark on the journey after they adapted a little. Therefore, the four armies set up row after row of transit camps at the border of Tubo. The million-strong army was like flowing water, coming and going in an endless stream. Seeing this, the high-spirited army of the Ashoka dynasty, under the call of King Ashoka, took the initiative to attack the Great Xia army, setting off the first wave of fighting at the border of Tubo. The Great Xia army, who suffered from altitude sickness, hadn't adjusted yet when they were attacked head-on by the enemy. They were a little flustered and inevitably had some casualties. Seeing this, the Ashoka dynasty took advantage of the victory and pursued the enemy. They announced that they would defeat the Great Xia army in one battle and completely expel the Great Xia army. They sent troops to frequently cause disturbances at the transit camps of the Great Xia army. The Great Xia army, which was full of confidence, received a severe warning. Seeing this, the commander-in-chief of the Northwest Theater of Operations ordered the four armies to use the camp at the transit station as the vanguard to stabilize their position. They were not to underestimate the enemy and advance rashly. They were to organize a counterattack after they had adapted to the highland climate. In the eyes of the soldiers of the Ashoka dynasty, the Great Xia army's show of weakness was naturally seen as a sign of cowardice. Therefore, they became even more arrogant and frequently showed off their prowess outside the Great Xia camp, taking the initiative to challenge them. The more it was so, the more strictly the Northwest War Zone Command Headquarters ordered all the divisions not to participate in the war. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed. September 1st, Shu Province, Chengdu City, Northwest War Zone Headquarters. The military counselor, Sun Yu, came to Li Jing's room, holding the battle report that had just been presented to him. He said worriedly, "Commander-in-Chief, all the officers and soldiers are very emotional now. The generals can't hold it in any longer." Li Jing looked up and asked, "Which path is the fiercest?" "The right wing," Sun Yu replied. "On the right flank were the 500,000 Qin soldiers led by Wang Jian." Pagoda-bearing King Li laughed when he heard that. "What a bunch of tigers and wolves." Fortunately, General Wang Jian is composed. Otherwise, I'm afraid they would have started a fight long ago. Sun Yu didn't know how to answer. Everyone knew that when His Majesty saw off the four armies, he especially praised the Qin army. He said that the 500,000 Qin soldiers' blood was boiling and their fighting spirit was high. Now that they had suffered a setback in the first battle, the Qin army naturally couldn't bear it. Fortunately, Wang Jian was there. This person had fought countless battles in his life. He was wise but not violent, brave and resourceful. In history, he had retreated bravely and completely retired. He was indeed an amazing general. Seeing this, pagoda-bearing King Li didn't mention it. He changed the topic and asked, "Currently, how many troops have adapted to the highland climate? How much rations and supplies have been transported to the front line?" Sun Yu replied, "Commander-in-Chief, at present, there are a total of 350,000 soldiers in the four armies that can participate in the war. The supplies that have been transported to the front line are also enough to support them for half a month." Half a month. Pagoda-bearing King Li thought for a while and sighed. The transportation of rations is still too slow. There's nothing we can do about it. The roads are too difficult to traverse. Some sections of the road can only be carried by horses or even by manpower. It's already very difficult to achieve the current results. Sun Yu explained, so far, more than 1,000 people have died or been injured during the transportation of rations. If His Majesty hadn't personally appeared, the governors would have had an opinion. It's the crucial period for sowing the second crop of rice now. No matter how difficult it is, we can't relax. I will personally report this matter to His Majesty. Pagoda-bearing King Li's expression was firm, and his tone was unquestionable. He knew very well that the outcome of this battle was not due to altitude sickness, but to rations. Rations were the lifeline of the army. They could not relax at all. Sun Yu nodded and had no objections. He knew that the commander-in-chief was not only the commander-in-chief of the Northwest Theater of Operations, but also one of the 3 rotating military ministers of the Grand Council. He was deeply trusted by His Majesty, so he could naturally listen to him. Although it's only for half a month, it's basically enough. If we delay any longer, I'm afraid there will be changes. It will also affect the morale and be disadvantageous to the subsequent battles. Sun Yu expressed his opinion. Pagoda-bearing King Li nodded. He also knew that the 2 million troops were not the regular army of the Great Xia dynasty. They had not been tempered by the military rules of the Great Xia dynasty, and their discipline was still a little lacking. If the enemy continued to provoke them like this, something might really happen. In that case, let the various armies choose the right time to move out. It's time to teach the enemy a bloody lesson. Otherwise, they don't know the immensity of heaven and earth and really think that the Great Xia dynasty can be bullied. Pagoda-bearing King Li made up his mind. All right, I'll draft the order now. Sun Yu heaved a sigh of relief. Following the order from the commander-in-chief, the 4 armies quickly took action. At the border of the West Sea Province, in the camp of the right-wing army, the middle-aged Wang Jian looked at the military order that had just been sent by the commander-in-chief and shouted in a loud voice, "Men, yes, summon all the generals to the tent for a discussion." "Yes, sir." In less than 10 minutes, the commanders of the army had gathered in the central military tent. During this period of time, the army had been holding their ground and not going out. The generals had long been bored to death. When they heard that the commander-in-chief was going to the tent for a discussion, they rushed over as fast as they could. Standing at the front was the young Wang Bin. He asked excitedly, "Father, are we going to send out the troops?" Wang Jian pressed his hands down, and the tent immediately fell silent. It was clear that Wang Jian had high prestige in the army. He said in a deep voice, "On the order from the commander-in-chief, all divisions are to shift from defense to offense. Choose the right time to attack and take advantage of the enemy's weakness. Within a week, the 4 armies must take down at least 1 enemy city and use it as an outpost." At this point, Wang Jian's gaze swept across the generals and asked, "Who dares to be the vanguard and lead the troops to attack Amdo City?" Amdo City was a county and also the city closest to the Qin army's camp. According to the scouts, the Ashoka dynasty had a total of 40,000 soldiers stationed in the city. They were not to be underestimated. "Father, I'm willing to go." Wang Bin was the first to request to go. Seeing this, the other generals tactfully kept quiet. Like father, like son, Wang Bin's prestige in the Qin army was second only to his father, Wang Jian. His great reputation and meritorious deeds were not just because of his father, but because he had real capabilities. In the Qin army, he was used to being addressed as young marshal. Seeing this, Wang Jian nodded his head. Since the first battle was bound to be victorious, Wang Bin's presence was the most reassuring to him. "Since that's the case, I order you to lead 70,000 men and take down Ando City within 5 days." The deadline given by the commander-in-chief was 7 days, and Wang Jian's demands were naturally higher. Unexpectedly, Wang Bin was even more ambitious and said, reporting to father, 3 days is enough. There's no joking in the army. Wang Jian did not want his son to be arrogant. Wang Bin was full of vigor. "I'm willing to make a military pledge." He was determined to be the first to take down the city among the 4 armies and show off the might of the Qin army. Fine, I'll give you 3 days. Wang Jian did not say anything else. Since the military pledge was made, the military law must be enforced. Thank you, father. Wang Bin cupped his fists and retreated to the side. Wang Jian looked around the tent again and ordered the rest of the divisions prepare for battle and provide support. Yes, the generals acknowledged in unison, their fighting spirit boiling. Go and prepare. Wang Jian waved his hand, and the generals filed out of the tent. In less than an hour, Wang Bin gathered his troops and with only 3 days' worth of rations, marched out of the camp in a grandiose manner, officially killing his way to the front line. The real Battle of Tubo has just begun. Not only the right-wing army, the left-wing army, the middle army, and the central army have also gathered their troops and marched out of the camp in a grandiose manner. This is to vent the resentment they have suffered for the past few days and also to fight for the credit of this battle. Who will be the first in this battle will attract a lot of attention. Chapter 1258. On the 2nd of September, in the palace of the capital. Just as the Great Xia army was attacking from all directions, Ouyang Shuo received a memorial from Li Jing. Li Jing did not blame the governors in the memorial. He only pointed out objectively that with the current logistical support capabilities, the army could not be completely unrestrained. If the war was delayed, the logistics would be forced, and it would only form a vicious cycle. In response to this situation, Ouyang Shuo specially summoned Sangua Fan, who was in charge of local government affairs, and Du Ruhui, who was in charge of logistics, to discuss a solution together. Both of you, how should we solve the logistical problems? Ouyang Shuo asked directly with a gloomy expression. The war in Tubo was a war that the empire could not afford to lose. He could not bear to see any officials feigning compliance and hindering the war. Seeing this, Sangua Fan was the first to step forward. He braced himself and said, "This humble subject will urge the 11 provincial governors to treat this matter as their top priority. At the same time, I suggest that we gather a batch of laborers and ox carts from the neighboring provinces to transport rations to the front line." Ouyang Shuo's expression softened a little. "Thank you for your hard work." Sometimes, Ouyang Shuo could understand the difficulties of his officials. The empire had expanded to this point and had 31 provinces, a capital governor's office, and 5 Zhili prefectures. It was extremely difficult to manage such a large empire. With a large territory, the entanglement of interests would naturally be complicated. The imperial court had its strategies, and the local provinces had their own difficulties. For example, the transportation of rations to the front line involved 11 provinces and was bound to be affected. It was understandable for the governors to feel a little unbalanced. After all, the imperial court's annual assessment targets could not be relaxed. Of course, understanding was one thing. Ouyang Shuo would never allow any governor to discount the tasks given by the imperial court because of a little difficulty. This was a matter of principle. Ouyang Shuo had to make a clear stand on this point. After Sangua Fan expressed his stance, it was Du Ruhui's turn. She said, "I suggest that the Soaring Eagle Army, the Flying Bear Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, and, if necessary, the Hudong Army and Hanoi Army should allocate a portion of their troops to help transport rations." This is a good idea. Ouyang Shuo nodded approvingly. The Great Xia Army had a complete system. Not only did they have engineers, but they also had soldiers transporting rations. The efficiency of transporting rations was more efficient than laborers. It was also a reasonable use of resources. After squeezing the 2 ministers dry, Ouyang Shuo then said, "This emperor often says that crisis is an opportunity, and this time is no exception. Sichuan, Tubo, and even Yunnan, the mountains are high and dangerous, the roads are difficult. It is very unfavorable for the imperial court to govern. This is especially true for Tubo. If there is no smooth official road connecting it to the center of the empire, even if it is conquered in the future, it will only be half an enclave, drifting away from the empire's system and full of hidden dangers. If that's the case, Why don't we take advantage of this war and make use of the existing labor and resources to build an official road connecting Sichuan and Tubo, completely opening up Tubo's external channels? Hearing this, the two ministers' eyes lit up. Sun Guofan even suggested, we can work on two tracks at the same time, one from Chengdu in the Shu province to Luojia City, and the other from Xingqing Prefecture in the West Sea province to Luojia City. Sure, Ouyang Shuan nodded approvingly. Historically, because of the high and dangerous mountains on the border of Tubo, it was very difficult to trade with the Central Plains. In modern society, the situation was completely reversed when the Sichuan-Abet and Qingzhong lines were built. What Great Xian needed to do now was to duplicate these two legendary official roads. In view of the fact that the empire's westward expansion was not limited to Tubo, there was also the Persian Empire to the west. The significance of building these two official roads was even more extraordinary. It would definitely become a main road connecting the imperial court to West Asia. After you come down, the cabinet will take the lead and the construction department will hire the best designers and survey engineers to determine the route of the two official roads. Once the plan is finalized, immediately start construction, Ouyang Shuo instructed. Your humble servant understands. In fact, with the Sichuan-Abet and Qingzhong lines in the real world as a reference, and the construction department did not lack first-class engineers hired from the players, it wasn't difficult to determine the road construction plan. The difficult part was the construction. To build these two official roads under such harsh conditions, it was unknown how many soldiers and laborers would be buried in the road construction forever. However, no matter how difficult it was, this matter had to be carried out. Back to the battlefield. At about 11 a.m. on the 2nd of September, Wang Bin led 70,000 mighty soldiers of the Great Qin dynasty. They traveled day and night and arrived at their destination, the outskirts of Amdo City. The vanguard troops arrived early in the morning. Along the way, Wang Bin's troops even fought with the enemy troops wandering at the border twice. One could imagine the result. The army of the Ashoka dynasty, who did not know the strength of the enemy, was utterly defeated by the Qin army and fled pathetically. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in a hurry to attack the city, Wang Bin would not have let them go so easily. Pass down my order. The entire army will rest for 3 hours and have a full meal. We will attack the city at 2 p.m. sharp. Wang Bin was very decisive. The moment he dismounted, he gave the order to the entire army. Yes, your majesty. Following the order, the soldiers unloaded the tents from the backs of the horses. Under the command of the general, they set up temporary tents at the designated locations according to certain rules. The supply soldiers and cooks skillfully set up cooking utensils and used mud and stones to build temporary stoves. They took out all kinds of vegetables and processed meat from their luggage and began to cook. In less than an hour, white tents were set up one after another. Although there were only 70,000 soldiers, the tents that were spread out were continuous and took up a large area. They were so densely packed that one could not see the end of them. Under the contrast of the blue sky and white clouds, it was a beautiful sight. As the smoke curled up from the chimneys, the aroma of food wafted through the camp, whetting the appetite of the soldiers. After eating the hot food, the well-trained soldiers of the Qin army, with the exception of those who were responsible for patrolling the perimeter, seized the time to enter the tents to rest and conserve their energy for the battle in the afternoon. Every extra ounce of stamina meant a higher chance of survival on the battlefield. Soon, the bustling camp returned to silence. Only the sound of snoring could be heard. In the army, the soldiers had long learned to sleep the moment they fell to the ground. They did not want to waste a single second. Not far from the camp, the 40,000-strong army of the Ashoka dynasty was already waiting at the top of Amdo City. The news of the battle between their vanguard troops and the enemy had already reached Amdo City and shocked the entire city. The current army of the Ashoka dynasty did not dare to underestimate the enemy troops outside the city. Their earlier arrogance had also been quietly restrained. Of course, they were not afraid. Firstly, the battle yesterday was a small-scale battle, and could not prove much. Secondly, they were defending the city and had the geographical advantage. Naturally, they had nothing to fear. The morale of both sides was maintained very well. At 1:30 in the afternoon, a horn sounded in the camp of the Qin army. This was the wake-up call. In the spacious and sparsely populated Tibetan plateau, the sound of the horn sounded especially distant and had a different feel to it. Accompanied by the distant sound of the horn, the quiet Qin army camp came to life in an instant. Half an hour later, the entire army was assembled. Their efficiency and discipline were impressive. Wang Jian and the rest of the Qin generals had trained the army quite a bit since they appeared in the wilderness. Although they did not have any actual combat experience, they were not to be underestimated. It was believed that those who survived the battle with Tubo would be the best of the best. Jiasu's strategy was indeed brilliant. While draining the strength of the Ashoka dynasty, Great Xia could also achieve the goal of training their soldiers and pick out the real elites from the 2 million surrendered soldiers. Attack! Wang Bin rode on a black warhorse and pointed his sword forward. Kill! 10,000 vanguard troops carried siege ladders and surged towards the city walls like a tide. In the Tibetan plateau, due to the environment, the city walls were usually made of a simple mixture of stones and mud. They were not strong and could not be built too high. The city walls of Laga City were only 6 meters tall. If that was the case in Laga City, it was even more so in the small Amdo city, which was only 4 meters tall. Furthermore, the smelting, construction, and forging techniques of the Tubo dynasty were lagging behind the dynasties of the Central Plains. The defense system of the cities was generally weak. Unfortunately, the Tubo dynasty's territory was vast and sparsely populated, so it was difficult to build a city. Except for a few cities, there were no more than 30 cities in its territory. As such, the Ashoka dynasty had no choice but to station 40,000 soldiers in a small city that was no different from a village in the Central Plains. The moment Wang Bin saw Amdo City, he felt reassured. If everything went smoothly, they would be able to stay in Amdo City at night and not have to suffer the cold in the suburbs. Last night, they finally experienced the cold nights of the Tibetan Plateau. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.